Hey everyone. Tonight we're going to take a dark walk back in time to a time when knights roamed castles. The church had the keys to heaven and your bedroom. And almost all men with titles believed that your uterus was natural. Yes, things will get a little strange with this one. A little unsettling too. To be honest, you're not going to make it through this. Not if you're a noble woman with a uterus or a peasant woman with an opinion. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in, but only if you truly like what I do here, as well as the time of day where you are and the city you are tuning in from in the comments section. Let's ease into tonight's voyage together by turning down the lights and possibly turning on a fan to provide a gentle background hum. In France in the 12th century, you are born a female. The mistake that everyone else sees isn't your first. Someone is already concerned about your virginity before you've even taken your first awkward steps or gotten your first tooth. Your body isn't just yours in a culture that is fixated with ancestry, territory, and divine order. Like fine linen or aged wine, it is a commodity, a delicate vessel that needs to be sealed, protected, and exchanged. The most negotiable possession in your family is your virginity. And it might even be worth a castle if you're fortunate enough to be born a nobleman. Being a virgin is more than just a romantic notion. It's a form of social money. It defines your place in heaven, the worth of your marriage, the negotiation of your dowry, and the reputation of your family. Your father tells you to keep your legs together, but he doesn't teach you letters or let you climb trees. Everyone does. During prayers, nuns whisper it. It is hammered into your ear like iron nails into wood by older women. God is also watching, especially while you're taking a bath. You've discovered that your body is not just embarrassing, but also a ticking time bomb by the time you reach your early teens, which is, marriageable age. Your value plummets like a wool market in the 14th century the moment you are suspected of losing your virginity, even in the absence of evidence. People want you to be quiet, not to provide proof. Your wedding night shouldn't have any blood on the linens. Your family name can be ruined by that. You are scrutinized, degraded, and disbelieved. Yet you also have too much faith. The role of the church is similar to that of a jealous lover. Preaching against women's desires and portraying Eve as the model for sin came from the pulpit. Virginity is valued for its power as much as its purity. It's ironic that women have to cede that power to men. For this, they even have saints. Virgin martyrs like Saint Agnes, Saint Cecilia, and Saint Lucy would sooner die horribly than part with their priceless, holy maiden heads. Her eyes were gouged out. They were burned together with others. They decapitated one. These stories are told to you like bedtime tales as you grow up. Better dead than deflowered is the message. This is where it gets really twisted. Virginity is political as well as moral. The integrity of your family is demonstrated by your intactmen. It demonstrates that you are unharmed and can thus continue your husband's lineage. It guarantees that any heir in the future is unquestionably his. This is a place of trust and patriarchal fear, not DNA testing. He may be raising someone else's child if you've already dated someone else and he marries you. And that's not just awkward. That's treason in a world where titles, property, and even the monarchy are passed down through bloodlines. Before marriage, some monarchs and lords even demand that a third party confirm your virginity. This job was held by real persons when you consider that their entire role is to prod, poke, and report on your bits. It seems wonderful that they were dubbed matrons of honor. Even a humorous historical footnote is included. Some medieval doctors thought that a woman's gait could be used to identify her as a virgin. No science. The creepiness was at its peak. But here's the deal. In reality, virginity was invisible. It wasn't something like a certificate or a coin. Even though it was undetectable and unseen, it nevertheless had complete influence over a girl's life. It is extremely hazardous and powerful because of this. Women who are slut-shamed, imprisoned, banished, or accused of losing it without consent. poor people can be rejected or forced into a convent. If you were a noble, you might be chastised in public as a warning, or worse, locked away until a discreet marriage could hide the scandal. Naturally, there were some strange side consequences from this preoccupation. Do you know what chastity belts are? Yes, those spiked iron devices that were said to resemble medieval lunch boxes and lock up a woman's groin. Historians disagree as to whether they were real, merely symbolic, or perhaps created centuries later to promote museum admission. Some others think they were more of a Renaissance invention, combining elements of paranoia and propaganda. Nevertheless, they embody a potent concept. The idea that a guy might be able to physically lock down his wife's body if he couldn't always control it. It's crazy how this preoccupation permeated every aspect of life. Architecture, art, and literature. Maidens' towers, lofty, inaccessible chambers in castles, were used to keep young, aristocratic girls safe from temptation and possible scandal. As if even legendary creatures were included in the troubadours and purity police, tapestries showed unicorns only being enticed by virgins. Those romantic poets sung of fair and pure females, but they were always viewed through the prism of a man's control and desire. Here is the academic discussion, however. Was the sole purpose of fetishizing virginity to manipulate women? Or was it also a means for weaker men, like as monks, lower-ranking knights, or younger sons, to gain spiritual elevation by worshipping an impossibility? There are others who contend that the cult of virginity was less about female rebellion and more about male insecurity. Some claim it served as a moral smoke cover for political maneuvering. In any case, it caused genuine wounds to actual people. In addition to making women's lives miserable, all of this policing also led to contradictions. There was a limit to the veneration of virginity. You were supposed to become pregnant right away after marriage, ideally with a son. You moved from being an entirely unaltered ship to a full-time baby factory. Just a quick change from "don't you dare" to "why aren't you pregnant yet?" There's no middle ground or personal preference. Try to picture yourself sleeping in a world where every element of your body is owned, observed, evaluated, and used for someone else's legacy while we curl up under warm blankets tonight. All because someone somewhere decided that your worth is determined by the things you haven't done. Sweet dreams, huh? You have therefore preserved your purported innocence. Congratulations, I suppose. Don't take it too easy, though. You're a teenager now. Your father is staring at you like he's inspecting a ship full of rare spices as your body is blossoming. You are going to be involved in a deal, but even the products, but the buyer. It's more akin to wrapping paper. Furthermore, the market plaza is not where this activity is taking place. It takes place at royal courts, castles, and monasteries. Greetings from the noble marriage game, where forming alliances is more important than you. Love has nothing to do with your wedding. Now, let's put that fantasy aside. Love is not for contracts with wax seals and bloodlines. It is for ballads and troubadours. You are a tool for gaining power in the society you live in. Your dad wants additional acreage. That is possible through marriage. The neighboring lord and your uncle are embroiled in a blood war. Wed the daughter of the adversary. Boom! A truce immediately. These unions are contracts of peace with veils and breasts. Your flesh could actually be the only thing preventing two countries from savagely attacking one another if you're a noble woman. But family politics aren't the only factor at play. It has to do with succession. It is assumed that you will repeatedly and instantly give birth to an heir, ideally a boy. You haven't even reached adulthood yet. Even if your husband is twice your age and has foul breath, there is already temptation to push forth a smaller imitation of him. You are inspected as a vessel after being safeguarded as a virgin. Although they don't state it directly, elder women's looks, prayers, and poorly veiled remarks all convey it. We pray that the Lord may bless your womb. Translation: either begin to produce or begin to panic. Let's also discuss the marriage ceremony. The entire event is an ownership theater. The bride is given away, literally passed on like a valuable cow from father to spouse. Cloaks, oaths, and rings. In certain civilizations, the husband would place a shoe or a piece of cloth over the bride's head as a sign of authority. Every move shouts, "I own you now. Isn't it romantic? You're obligated to serve a man for life, even though you've never even held his hand." Extra points if he believes that conversation is just for monks and court gestures because he is missing half of his teeth. And don't believe that peasants are exempt from this. Indeed, their marriages are more pragmatic and less politicized. However, the majority of a woman's role is still reproductive. Just as lords needed heirs, so did farm hands. The only difference is that in this case, the issue is not inheritance, but rather who will take the cow once you die. The distinction. Back-breaking labor and delivery were performed by peasant women, typically with no medical assistance, and a midwife who studied goat anatomy and mumbled prayers was employed. However, these marriages have a peculiarly eerie quality, something that you can't get rid of. The understanding that the man at the altar is not marrying you for your intelligence, your voice, or your sense of humor is what it is. Because of your uterus, he is marrying you, with the belief that it will yield male descendants who will not perish from terrible soup, war, or epidemic. And you are to blame if it doesn't. Never his, never his. In the Middle Ages, a woman's sin was infertility. The man is not questioned. They only give the woman a sidelong glance and recommend additional prayers, fasting, or worse, getting a second wife. This fixation is intensified in royal families. Consider Aquitaine's Eleanor. Powerful, intelligent, and politically astute, she lost favor by not bearing Henry VII additional sons. Even queens are judged by their performance in the Olympics of medieval baby-making. If they fail, they are either secretly poisoned, abandoned in monasteries, or imprisoned in towers. Life and death are on the line. There is no pressure. And here's a little oddball side note. Before getting married, some aristocrats even tested a bride's fertility. No, not like a test in the lab. It is more akin to a superstitious ritual that involves body temperature, moon cycles, and, oddly enough, urine tests using barley seeds. Yes, barley. You were regarded as fertile if the grain sprouted in your urine. If not, you might be sent to God before your time, or just married off to a lower ruler who didn't mind using your womb as a gambling device. Scholars now debate whether these ladies had any influence over the process. Some claim that noble women also used marriage as a tactic, secretly influencing alliances. Indeed, a few strong, astute ladies were able to take advantage of the game. However, the majority had no voice at all. Men made the marital contract, your father, your prospective spouse, and occasionally even your monarch. It was your responsibility to remain quiet, or at least obliging and agreeable. The scrutiny starts as soon as you move into your husband's estate after the wedding, distant from your relatives. Do you have an odd gait? Is that a sign of pregnancy? Have you missed any meals? Do you have no children? Your servants begin to whisper as well. Your husband's mother, his sisters, and his priest pay you a visit and ask you polite but frightening questions about your appetite and monthly flow. It is comparable to a one-woman fertility experiment in which she has no voice and is judged harshly. And congrats when you become pregnant. You've purchased 9 months of accolades. However, if the baby is a girl, your victory is reduced to a courteous shrug, so don't get too comfortable. If it's a boy, you're a walking prize, a miracle, and a saint. Additionally, you are also at blame if the infant dies. You may walk too far. You may not have prayed enough. Perhaps your family is being punished by God, or perhaps medieval medicine is simply horrible. A lot of this is based on fear. Fear of chaos, fear of illegitimate children, and fear of women's authority beyond procreation. Medieval men maintained a firm hold on inheritance, property, and legacy by attaching a woman's worth to her capacity to bear noble sons. Take charge of the body to take charge of the future. That was the reasoning. Although cruel, it served their purposes. Imagine lying in a canopied bed under thick woolen blankets tonight, with your fan humming softly and the lights dimming around you. Your stomach is already swollen with a child, and you know that your entire worth, safety, future, and even soul are measured not by what you do, but by what your body can offer someone else. The monastery bells toll like a steady heartbeat, drawing light through the stained glass windows as you awaken before they do. Depending on where you are in life, you may already be pregnant, in pain from sleep, attempting to be, or praying not to be. And the enormous whispering object, the church, is right outside the walls of your chamber. It enters your life like fragrant, stifling incense. It teaches you when to confess, how to love, what to eat, and above all, what your body is capable of. Don't believe your husband controls your body. He is merely a middle manager. Your womb and soul are run by the church. Of course, they don't. Say it that way. They use Latin poetry and stained glass halos to phrase it. Do not be misled, however, by the medieval church's obsession with regulating sex, and particularly women's access to it. It frames sexuality as shameful, harmful, and most importantly, feminine. Lust is more than a sin. It is a sin committed by women. It began with Eve. Recall that Eve tempted Adam after taking a mouthful, and all of a sudden there was agonizing childbirth and eternal damnation. That's a cool story, dude. You are now in a world that was created based on Eve's purported error. You are the embodiment of sin, not just the result of it. These dazzling webs of reasoning are spun by theologians such as Augustine. Compared to men, women are weaker, more sensual, and more like animals. As a result, they need to be controlled. Only in marriage, and only then, is sex considered sacred, not for pleasure, but for procreation. It's an issue if you find it enjoyable. It's a double sin if you make your husband enjoy it excessively. Imagine hearing this every Sunday as a teenager. Your only chance for redemption is via obedient suffering. Your body is in peril, and your desires are betraying you. Additionally, don't even consider baring your hair. That is an impending controversy. According to some monks, a man could commit sin simply by letting a woman's exposed hair fly in the wind. You cover it then. You look down. You move like a guileless temptation. This is where the major contradiction lies. Having children is sacrosanct, yet having sex is wicked. You are therefore trapped in a moral limbo where you are supposed to have sex but never find it enjoyable. You are not a person. You are a vessel. They believe that the role of the church is to balance the tightrope for you. Permit just enough sexual activity to keep people alive, but not so much that people, especially women, begin to enjoy themselves. Admittance turns into a minefield. If you felt warm during intercourse, or if you dared to touch yourself, you kneel in the wooden booth and utter your sins. Yes, they put it that way. It sounds comfortable to be warm. It isn't. The priest advises you to fast, wash with cold water, mortify your flesh, pray more, and perhaps spend some time sleeping on a board. This goes beyond simple spiritual guidance. It's salvation disguised as body control. This is a strange little tidbit of information. Even marital sex, according to some monks, was only acceptable on specific days. Certainly not during menstruation, Lent, Advent, feast days, or Sundays. Maybe 100 safe days a year would result from adding all of those. God forbid you get pregnant outside of the window that is considered spiritually acceptable. This could be the reason why some women kept calendars for sin cycles rather than feasts. It was like trying to play moral hopscotch in a minefield to be a pious wife. Some women, however, internalize this. In their own households, they take on the role of moral police, reprimanding boys for staring too long and daughters for being loose bodices. Noble women are flagging themselves with hair shirts underneath their dresses because they are afraid that men would fall for their beauty. Girls who enter convents at the age of 10 are also taught to despise their flesh, should scour their skin raw with vinegar and fast till they pass out. You become more pure the more you suffer. That was the agreement. The rules, however, are not universally accepted. Under the surface, there is scholarly disagreement in clusters and religious communities. Some contend that having sex when married is a sacred practice. Others maintain that, like burning a heretic or bleeding a sufferer, it's an unfortunate necessity. Nobody can agree on how much control is too much, which is the true source of friction here. Bishops are perplexed too. Is pleasure inherently sinful? Can a wife ever start a romantic relationship? What would happen if she refused? Because ambiguity keeps control in the hands of confessors rather than believers, the Church hems and holgore, but never provides a definitive response. And you know who isn't asked? They're all terrified of you, the woman, the one who resides in the body. The doctrine is not decided by midwife committees. The Cathedral Council did not invite any pregnant peasants, men in robes and scrolls discussing the frequency of bathing without tempting the devil. It goes beyond doctrine. It's also art. When you enter a cathedral, you see Eve again, disgraced and nude, and Adam appears somewhat perplexed. When you glance up at the fresco, you see Mary, calm, clothed, and radiant with virtue. Eve or Mary, virgin or temperess, or saint. These are your options. The center lane does not exist. God forbid you don't fit within those roles. For example, you may be barren, widowed, and don't want to be married again, or you may simply not be interested in having sex. Conversations begin. Is she a witch? Is she under the influence of someone? Is she meeting someone in secret in the woods? Because simply refusing to fit in is dangerous in a society this inflexible. Here's a twist, though. Some savvy ladies make use of the system. They become proficient in the prayers, gain the priest's confidence, and gain influence. Some become besses, women in charge of towns, estates, and convents. They write letters to popes, quote scripture more accurately than bishops, and sometimes even defy the law. Do they remain imprisoned within the machine? Indeed. However, they are using levers that are located inside the gears. Imagine yourself with the weight of centuries-old sermons bearing down on your ribcage as you lie back tonight and your breathing stops. Your body has been transformed into a battleground between virtue and sin, theologized and evaluated. Perhaps all you wanted was to be able to stroll barefoot on the grass without feeling as though every hip movement required forgiveness. Saint or sinner, get a good night's sleep. You may be 13 or 14, too old to burn, too old to marry, too old to bleed. When they knock, they'll say that, at the very least. This time, not for marriage, not for a blessing or to negotiate a dowry. It's worse this time. You know too much, so they're coming this time. Or perhaps you assisted in a birth. Alternatively, you instructed your cousin to steep a bag of dry herbs in warm water and then take a break. You've crossed your lane, whatever it was. You've behaved as though you might truly own both your body and the bodies of other women. And that's risky since you're no longer a girl. You're a witch. First, there are murmurs. In the community, there are always stillbirths. The cow stops producing milk. After falling into the stream, a man's leg rots. People seek a cause, a form for their bad luck. And for decades, the church has been establishing that shape. Women, midwives, healers, smart, impoverished, single, and self-sufficient. You midwives are essentially the first to be targeted. They've been doing what male doctors can't or won't do for generations. Delivering children, rescuing laboring women, and identifying which plants reduce pain and which prevent pregnancy. They are overly familiar with death and blood. They are frequently elderly, childless, and frighteningly certain. Naturally, They are therefore portrayed as demonic. You've seen one. She demonstrated how to combine pennyroyal and mugwort. Just to ease cramps, perhaps to induce a late period, not for sinister rituals. However, those herbs are potent, secret, and sacred. Furthermore, you shouldn't have that kind of authority. Not in Latin, not without robes. Therefore, the knowledgeable women, herbalists, lonely people, and sharp-tongued people are the first to suffer when things go wrong. A group of men who have never bled, but think they understand what the devil does to a womb drag you before them. They inquire as to whether you have slept with Satan, whether he has paid you a visit during the night, whether you have flown on a broom, and whether you have danced nude in the woods. Truth is not what they desire. In order to satisfy their dread, they require a confession. A few of them think so. Some are merely complying. Some are using it as a pretext to intimidate and suppress women. To be honest, intelligent women in the Middle Ages did frighten people, particularly if their knowledge was transmitted outside of the church, guilds, and male authority. This is the scary part. The distinction between a heretic and a healer is quite fine. Birthing methods, herbal medicines, and practical anatomy, the very abilities that saved lives, are now being presented as black magic. You were skilled at soothing a woman in labor. It's magic. You did not faint when you touched a bleeding thigh. Your courage is unholy. Someone you brought back from a fever. I'm sure you're dealing with demons. Care turns become crime all of a sudden. Malus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, a well-known medieval treatise that was written in the late 1400s, adds fuel to the fire. It is essentially the best manual on how to identify and torture witches. It's also preoccupied with women's bodies. Spoiler alert. It charges women with having an innate propensity for wickedness, weak intellect, and insatiable lust. It claims that because women are more gullible and sexually inclined, they are more likely to become witches. It's real science. You're not mistaken if you're wondering, wait, wasn't this more of an early modern phenomenon? Though the seeds are sown in the medieval mindset, the actual height of witch hunting did not occur until much later. The path to those latter fires was built by a thoroughly medieval fear of unbridled female knowledge, particularly regarding sex, birth, and the body. Here's the fringe detail, though. Without being tortured, a few alleged witches confessed. They asserted that they actually flew, conversed with spirits, or used miraculous healing techniques. Were they lying under duress? Or were they delusions? Or was it a final act of defiance in a world that had already condemned them, a sort of reclaiming? This is a topic of debate among academics. It was a kind of insurrection, according to some. Others claim that compulsion and trauma distorted reality. However, it's a tale in and of itself that anyone would want to admit to. Having power in a society that penalized it. Not to mention how jealousy plays a part in your neighbor's crops failing while yours thrives. Untrustworthy. While other women experience miscarriages, your body continues to function normally. Untrustworthy. You have some independence and land, because your husband passed away while he was young. Very suspicious. This goes beyond sin and sex. It has to do with control. You live just outside the system, which makes you hazardous, and that annoys the system. The penalty is different. You're scorched in certain spots. Others were hung or drowned. Sometimes you are imprisoned in a nunnery, deprived of your identity, and made to atone for actions you did not do. Additionally, they ask you questions about your physique and the places where the demon touched you. What aspect of yourself changes form? When you made your vow, did you bleed? Your physical form serves as the proof. You are probed, examined, prodded, and reduced even when you are dead. Here's a twist, though. There are other offenders than the church. Women also accuse other women. Envious neighbors, irate midwives, and mothers-in-law who became informants. Why? Because dread spreads easily, because sometimes blaming others is necessary to survive. because helping keep someone else's head down lower is the simplest way to survive when your entire existence is centered around keeping yours down. And your movements are altered by this fear. You conceal what you know. You quit combining herbs. You act as though blood frightens you. You know better than to act helpless during labor. You observe your laughs, your gait, and your tongue. Because even the slightest hint of the incorrect thing can cause someone to see horns where none exist, you use your power in silence. So imagine yourself in a peaceful village surrounded by hills and meadows as you draw the blanket up to your chin tonight. And see how the term witch alters the atmosphere. It's a word rife with ignorance, control, and patriarchy masquerading as piety. And it's a term that could spell the end for you. Rest easy, sage. With your hands folded as you've been taught and your skirts modestly tucked about your ankles, you're seated on a rough wooden bench. A priest stands across the room holding a candle and a parchment scroll, speaking about the fall of man, but in reality, it's the fall of woman. He reads Genesis slowly, forcefully, and almost clandestinely. By now, the tale is ingrained in your memory. The original sin, the serpent, the apple, and Eve. You've heard it countless times in songs and sermons, and it's like a warning etched into the stone of cathedrals. And each time it descends a bit more, your body, your suffering, your desires, all of these are hereditary penalties. It is referred to as Eve's curse. It's an acronym for the monthly events that take place inside of you. This isn't biology, despite the cramps, blood, and exhaustion that shroud your bones. Theology is involved. Is cosmic vengeance? The lining of your uterus is not being shed. You're being reminded that your body must endure eternal suffering because Eve introduced death into the world. This is not whispered by the priest. He declares it as though your pain were a form of holy atonement, like the scheduled apology from your uterus. And menstruation is just the beginning. This is where the entire concept of pain during childbirth originates. Divine retribution. It is amid grief that you must bear children. The line is that. It is said to be what God said to Eve just before he expelled her from paradise. And centuries of normalized female pain are built along that line. When you are in labor, you scream. Excellent. It is therefore functioning. It indicates that you are making debt payments. Naturally, some theologians sweeten the message by arguing that the Virgin Mary offered a new path, and that maternity was a way for women to redeem themselves. However, suffering persisted as a consequence of being born a woman. Discomfort was dangerous to try to soothe discomfort with herbs, chants, or another woman's assistance. The suffering was sacred. Steering clear of it was heresy. This is the part that hardly ever appears in the stained glass windows. The church was divided on the true meaning of Eve's curse. According to some, it solely alluded to bodily pain, menstruation, and childbirth. Others asserted that it went so far as to require women to submit to men as retribution for Eve's disobedience. Some even maintained that labor and toil also cursed men. Let's face it, though, nobody inked that on the cathedral's walls. Furthermore, we cannot pretend that these thoughts remained in the pulpit. They permeated everyday existence. You are taught that women are inherently more emotional, gullible, and prone to seduction, and that your thoughts are unreliable like garden weeds unless they are brought to light by masculine guidance or confession. Your body is a sign of vulnerability and peril. You are instructed to hide it, to be afraid of it, and to treat all of its natural functions as if they were moral crises. During your moon period, you are literally regarded as filthy. Women who are menstruating are prohibited from attending churches by several religious orders. Some say your touch may damage crops, sour wine, or make bread moldy. Metaphors are not what these are. They are accepted facts. It is implied in one notorious literature that a woman who is menstruating will burn the crops just by passing across a field. Your body turns into a blight just because it does its intended function. Furthermore, it doesn't end there. Suspicion persists after marriage. It intensifies it, if anything. It is expected of you to be holy and untarnished in spirit while being sexually available to your spouse. Eve wants more. Too much want. The pride is too small. Silence is your only safe route. Pain disguised as piety, obedience cloaked in patience, and subjection. The ridiculousness is summed up in this fringe idea. Some people in some parts of Europe think that women who are menstrual have the power to call forth storms and thunderstorms simply by being there. You may chuckle at this point, but picture yourself growing up in a hut where your mother forbids you from going outdoors while you're bleeding, since doing so could curse the animals. Think about internalizing that. It's perilous to feel that your body is more than just a source of shame. And don't believe that this is simply true for peasants or people from small towns. These views were even cited as medical reality by intellectuals, doctors, priests, and learnt men. It was believed that menstrual blood was toxic. Doctors said it might cause canines to go crazy, damage mirrors, and blacken iron. In medieval science, your body was literally a chemical weapon. Here's the worst part, though. You are still expected to have children in spite of all of this. All of this legend and humiliation is actually packed into a small, incongruous box. You are sacred, yet also filthy and harmful. Although you are frail and prone to sin, you have the capacity to bear saints. When you are obviously pregnant, the same men who are afraid of your blood will turn around and give you praise. Some women softly push back, as if holiness has finally taken over your rebellious body. A few courageous people start reinterpreting Eve. They portray her in their poetry as the first person to pursue knowledge, a woman who dared to desire more, rather than as the antagonist. Women theologians, yes, they existed, start to expose flaws in the theology in secret letters and outlawed literature. Eve might have been wise. That the curse was a cautionary tale rather than an order from God? Even now, behind sealed chapel doors, these beliefs flame like candles, harmful as they are. The majority of women still acknowledge the cursed as reality. When the entire civilization is based on the idea that your joy is questionable, your anguish is justified, and your bleeding is a moral failing, what other option do you have? To question it requires more than just guts. It requires seclusion, rejection, and occasionally a lack of willpower to oppose what society maintains is divine order. Your head is bowed. Your hands are folded. Even as it breaks you, you give thanks to God for your suffering. You come to regard your own suffering as a form of currency for spiritual rewards, and you learn to smile despite the pain. The saddest part is that it occasionally succeeds. You can feel truly holy at times when you're kneeling on a cold stone floor, bleeding between your thighs, and reading scripture with your head full. Imagine living a life in which your own body seems like a weapon and a punishment when you curl up under your blanket tonight and feel your heart beat slow, where each blood drop serves as a subtle reminder that you are descended from a lady who had the courage to reach out, and ever then, the world has been punishing you for it. This is how it begins. There are a few cramps, a slight pain behind your hips, and a quiet silence in your abdomen that shouldn't be there. Then your midwife repeats something you've heard a dozen times while leaning in. This time, though, it sounds more like a sentence than a blessing. It will arrive. The great equalizer is childbirth. This is the point at when your body becomes public property, regardless of whether you are a queen or a milkmaid. Perhaps not in name, but in reality. Because your suffering becomes everyone's concern once the baby decides it's time. Particularly the men who say they are in authority. It was always said that pregnancy was special, even miraculous. Like a spectral boss, the Virgin Mary hovers over your pregnancy. No perspiration and a flawless shine. However, no one is quoting scripture now when the contractions begin and your bones feel like they are about to break from the inside out. They are fervently praying for you, the child, the family line, and, let's face it, the father's reputation. Because this is the silent horror of delivery in the Middle Ages. You are disposable. What counts is the child, the lineage, God's will if you die, God's kindness if you live. There are a lot of women in the room where you give birth, mothers, neighbors, midwives, and occasionally even servants. Men, at least physically, keep out. However, their presence is still present and is reflected in every fright and prayer. Since women are not allowed in medical schools, midwives are frequently taught by other women rather than by academic institutions. Their expertise is regarded as inferior, despite the fact that they have delivered hundreds of infants and are aware of what to do in the event that the baby refuses to turn or the umbilical cord wraps. Folk knowledge, risky knowledge, and knowledge that only matters when it supports the male doctor's preconceived notions. It's funny because the majority of male doctors have never ever witnessed a delivery. They base their treatises on the notions of Galen or Hippocrates, two ancient Greek men who believed that women's insides were simply colder inverted versions of men's, and that wombs roamed around the body like lost cats. Very innovative stuff. However, if something goes wrong, the male doctor is frequently called in late, unprepared, and with more opinions than experience. And when it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. In the Middle Ages, childbirth was cruel. No antibiotics, no anesthesia, no sanitation. The best you can hope for is a competent midwife with strong nerves and steady hands. If the labor stalls, the baby gives birth, or there is excessive blood. As your family struggles to decide whether to save you or the baby, the worst scenario is a priest standing at your bedside to grant last rites. Here's a terrible detail about the periphery. According to some church leaders, a baby's soul was lost, gone, destined for limbo, or worse, if it passed away before being baptized. In order to execute emergency baptisms, sometimes even before the infant was fully born, midwives had to acquire the necessary skills. They would sprinkle holy water on a head that had not yet been delivered and mumble prayers into the crimson quiet between pushes, thinking it would be sufficient. Imagine the pressure. Someone is kneeling next to you, chanting holy words to rescue a soul in case it slips away with the next contraction while you're struggling to stay alive and barely breathing. And if the mother passes away, prayers are said in her honor. If she was noble, perhaps in a little painted icon. If she was a servant, perhaps not at all. In any case, it is considered a component of the cost. The gift of childbirth, together with the associated risk of mortality, was bestowed upon women by God, like a snake inside a wrapped gift. It is expected of you to take it gracefully. Don't assume, however, that all of the ladies were passive in this situation. Some battled for authority over their births and bodies. Male doctors were rejected by some. Some bought remedies from midwives to hasten the process or lessen the discomfort. Instead, than reclining back like a shattered doll, as some doctors desired, some insisted on giving birth in an upright position, squatting on straw or clutching wooden poles. Some ladies in Italy even penned guides on childbirth. Yes, real medieval teaching texts that were grounded in experience and observation rather than merely theory. However, their voices were little, relegated to the periphery, and frequently disregarded. The paradoxes start to swirl like smoke at this point. The church praised motherhood but denounced female pleasure. It needed women to create new Christians, but it feared their bodies. While it permitted women to wield life and death in their hands during childbirth, it denied them positions of religious authority. There was always that strain. It simply became more profound. Add social pressure to the equation now. It is expected of you to have healthy sons. No pressure, isn't it? You receive a courteous nod if the baby is a girl. Bells may ring if it's a boy, and people start talking if you don't carry to term more than once. You might be cursed. It might be something you consumed. Perhaps you didn't pray fervently enough, or you make a saint angry. It's Never your husband. It's always you. He might be shooting blanks like a trebuchet that has broken. Furthermore, nobody would dare to propose it. This is where the situation becomes even more dire. Some women, noble women in particular, died from repeated pregnancies stacked one on top of the other, in addition to the actual birthing process. No recuperation period, no birth control, just never-ending cycles of bleeding, swelling, and praying the baby survives this time. It's your responsibility. That is your value. And then your body fails you. People continue to claim that childbirth is a blessing. As you lie in your quiet room tonight, perhaps holding a pillow or curling on your side, consider the women who lay in straw chambers with sweat pooling beneath their backs, surrounded by women whispering and praying anxiously. These women knew the risks, but they faced them anyway. They had no other option, and they carried life inside of them like a ticking clock, counting down to a moment that could bring them joy, sorrow, or both at once. And they repeated themselves repeatedly. Go to bed now. You deserve it. You're ill. It's the kind of sickness that spreads rumors, not the kind that stops the world. It might be a fever. Perhaps you have new stomach twists. Perhaps your family contacts the doctor because you're feeling weak, which seems comforting until you realize what that actually means in your century. He's a man who thinks your womb might be moving up into your throat, wears heavy wool robes all year round, and has a pouch of leeches with him. Yes, medieval medicine was essentially a risky concoction of ego, superstition, and sporadic conjecture. Additionally, the speculation becomes more creative if you're a woman. Clove, perspiration, ink, and decay are among the scents that accompany the doctor's arrival. He doesn't inquire about your feelings. When did you last bleed? He asks. He avoids making eye contact with you. He examines your neck, your wrists, and your urine. He could taste it, peering into the cup as if evaluating a subpar wine. Have you had any strange thoughts? He says. He may inquire as to whether your husband has been carrying out his responsibilities, which is a tactful way of implying that he is going to accuse you of causing your own pain before accusing your husband of causing your womb to act out. It's a win-win situation. Blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile are the four humors that are thought to control your body. Balance is key to good health. Unbalance is illness. Too wet, too dry, too hot, or too chilly. Naturally, women are classified as inherently wet and cold, essentially making them more unstable. Excessive bleeding, too much blood, insufficient bleeding, and poisoning of the blood. By the way, that isn't figurative. They genuinely believe that menstrual blood that has been trapped rots inside of you and induces madness. Wandering womb syndrome is the result of this. That is a legitimate diagnosis. According to medieval European belief, if you didn't have regular intercourse or childbirth, your uterus could literally move about your body, strangling and confusing you as it went from your legs to your lungs and even your brain. Dizziness, anxiety, fainting, choking, mood swings, and, be prepared, excessive reading are all signs of this so-called uterus. Therapy. To entice the womb back into place, some doctors advise placing potent-smelling plants between the legs and close to the nose. Obviously, a pregnant womb is a well-behaved womb, hence some recommend marriage and frequent sex. That's the reasoning. This diagnosis is almost a given whether you're widowed or unmarried. They say that you're essentially carrying a live grenade in your belly. Furthermore, the treatment exposes you even in cases where the diagnosis is less ludicrous. Bleeding frequently results from intent rather than harm. Physicians enjoy causing their patients, particularly ladies, to bleed. They think it balances your sense of humor. As your body attempts to heal from a sickness you don't comprehend, you may find yourself with a vein opened and blood dripping into a bowl, all because a man believes your uterus has GPS. But there are other options besides doctors. A local wise lady who understands how to crush lavender and yarrow and wrap the leaves just so might also be able to aid. Her remedies make more sense and have an earthy scent. But it's dangerous to trust her, as we've already discussed. She's a witch after one bad result and one suspicious neighbor. Additionally, you could be her accomplice if she is a witch. Some women attempt to solve problems on their own. Some of the plants they use were handed down from mothers and aunts, while others were recorded in books that were concealed beneath floorboards. For cramping, they may make a pennyroyal or root tea. A few of these herbs are effective. Some are harmful. Above all, however, they stand for something that medieval medicine despises: female independence. It's dangerous how well you understand your own body, and it's blatantly treasonous that it frequently performs better than the doctor's bleeding bull. Texts also reflect this conflict between male medicine and female bodies. The Trota is a medieval gynecological manual that was composed at Salerno, Italy, remarkably ahead of its time. Whether it was authored by a woman is still up for question, but it covers everything from infertility to menstruation problems. It's huge if it was. If not, someone had the foresight to at least collect authentic female perspectives. In any case, the existence and dissemination of this book demonstrates a glimmer of consciousness. Women's bodies are not simply less powerful than men's. They require different care since they are different. But if you're looking for someone who treats you like a body guru, good luck. You are being theatrical if you faint. You are unstable if you weep. They term it vapors if you complain of stomach pain. Refusing closeness is a sign of coldness. You are possessed if you look for it. Every action you take is filtered through a mist of deception and mistrust. You're not going to win. Your body doesn't feel ill. Yes, you are. And here's a curious historical footnote. Long-term looking at a beautiful lady was thought to cause physical symptoms in men, such as weak knees, pale skin, and blood in the cough. The remedy is frequently to marry the woman, or, in less civilized situations, to lie with her. Therefore, your body is held responsible for both men's and women's disorders. How much of this was genuine ignorance and how much was intentional control is still up for debate among academics. Medieval physicians, according to some, were only making the most of what they had. Others maintain that the system's purpose of confusing, controlling, and medicalizing femininity was precisely what it was designed to do. Most likely, both. However, the outcome is the same regardless of the intention. You live in a world where the pain you experience is either unnoticeable or amplified. And in either scenario, the prescription pad is in the possession of someone else. Imagine resting on a straw-stuffed bed tonight as someone with ink-stained fingers puts a leech behind your ear as your body becomes comfortable in the mattress and your breath becomes softer. Imagine being informed that your voice is too high-pitched to be healing, your blood is rebellious, and your womb is disobedient. Even when they refuse to listen, you can only image how strongly you would want to whisper, "No, I know what's wrong. I know my own body. Just listen." Not quite yet. Once more, the church bells ring. And you're not kneeling in a pew or in bed this time. The narrative of St. Margaret of Antioch is being whispered to you by an elderly woman as you are kneeling in the dirt behind a collapsing monastery wall. Her voice has a hint of harshness, but she narrates it like a tale. More than awe. Perhaps awe or dread, as St. Margaret, like so many others, did not just die for her beliefs. Because she defended her virginity, she was destroyed. And that was the pinnacle of body horror during the Middle Ages. A lady who is so committed to her virginity that she would sooner be ripped apart than allow a man to touch her. You are familiar with the tales. They can be found anywhere. In the chant sung by drowsy novices, in manuscripts, and in murals in cathedrals. Because her hair grew to conceal her body, St. Agnes, who was condemned to death after rejecting a Roman officer, miraculously managed to stay shamelessly nude. Saint Agatha, who was subsequently healed by a vision of Saint Peter after having her breasts amputated for refusing a suitor. To stop a guy from longing for her, Saint Lucy gouged out her own eyes. Then there is Saint Margaret, who was completely ingested by a dragon and then made the sign of the cross from within to escape its belly. These women are cautionary tales as well as legends. Their tales are inherited as moral role models. However, in reality, they are violent, graphic, bloody, mutilation scenarios that are presented as moral triumphs. According to the Church, losing your purity is worse than dying since it is so precious. These ladies use their bodies as a battlefield, becoming spiritual warriors. And if torturers have burned, disfigured, or otherwise damaged that battlefield, that's just a part of the sacredness. In a perverse sense, it is both appealing and unsettling. Halos are bestowed upon these martyrs. We recall their names. They were ruined, which is why they are celebrated. You begin to question if this is what it means to be holy. To be appreciated, do you have to die? Does your body just have value when it is bleeding appropriately? On the battlefield, the pee or the delivery bed? This has a rather unsettling undertone. Teenage ladies who are only a little older than you are frequently these saints. Their tales are narrated by adults, recorded by monks, and shown in the margins of illuminated manuscripts with far too much detail. Medieval art depicting these saints in the middle of their martyrdom is a whole genre. Faces calm, eyes gouged, breasts severed, limbs torn, coffee. It is akin to the eroticization of suffering itself, not in the overtly contemporary sense, but rather in the way these pictures evoke both terror and desire, adoration and sympathy. You begin to believe that your body isn't telling your narrative. It serves as a backdrop for a morality play by someone else. Here's another odd, little-known truth. Some of these saints gained enormous popularity as a result of their uncorrupted lives as well as their suffering. Their bodies did not rot. To see St. Clare's glass casket or St. Catherine's mummified finger, pilgrims would journey for days. People thought that the preservation of their bodies demonstrated their sanctity, as though the divine had intervened to stop the natural decay and maintain what had previously been unaltered. Right up until you see the implications, it's a lovely notion. A dead body, untouchable by sex, encased under glass, and eternally silent, is the only ideal male body. However, the saint cult did not appeal to everyone. Silently, some intellectuals, women in particular, questioned if all of this exalted suffering was truly inspired by God, or was only a fancy way of societal control. Some academics even argued over whether the stories were made up, or worse, overblown. Did Lucy actually remove her eyes, or did centuries of overzealous scribes misinterpret that symbol? Whether the stories were true or not is still up for debate among historians, but they were nonetheless potent. The way these legends influenced behavior is more fascinating. In an attempt to produce obedient, devout offspring, parents named their daughters after these martyrs. Girls were instructed to read the biographies of the saints in order to learn how to withstand temptation, even if it meant being disfigured. Furthermore, these tales weren't only hypothetical to many. They were blueprints. You are raised to believe that suffering is sanctity, that pain is purity, and that your body is a vehicle for something greater than yourself, whether that something is fire, knives, or untamed animals. Additionally, this message permeates daily existence. You are compared to a saint if you reject a man's advances. You'll be Eve again if you don't fight. In any case, you're being evaluated against the horror of another person. In addition to being commended for your untouchability, you are also required to get married, serve, and submit. The contradiction is unending. In a single sentence, you are to embody both the fertile mother and the virgin martyr. A persistent sense of failure is brought on by this dual responsibility. You never quite measure up. You are accused of being frigid if you are too pure. You're a harlot if you're too open. You're weird and too pious. You're dangerous if you're not pious enough. The metric is always your body, not your generosity, not your thoughts, not your labor, not your body, not what it does, not what it doesn't do, what it bears. What do you do then? Some females enter convents out of survival rather than vocation. A bride of Christ is preferable to a pawn in another person's marriage union. It is preferable to live a life of prayer and fasting than to jeopardize your moral character in the marital battlefield. But the stories of the martyrs haunt you even there. There's always the bloodless saint around to remind you that a little body horror is necessary for true holiness. Try to picture sleeping with those stories snuggled under your skin as you slide into your pillow tonight, the air thick with the silence that only comes at midnight. Imagine thinking you would be eligible for a spot in the stained glass if you died a terrible enough death. That your anguish may become legend, your suffering become beauty, and your only way out of control could be death, if you're unlucky, or sainthood, if you're not. Every medieval woman has a realization at some point in her life that death and birth are not mutually exclusive. They share a room. And you're normally lying flat on a board, gasping, sweating, and with your tummy taut, with your eyes on the wooden rafters and your ears tuned to the midwife's murmuring when that moment occurs. You're going to have another baby soon, and to you that feels like a knife's edge, even though the church might view it as holy and your neighbors as heroic. One mistake, one poor perspective, one fateful sneeze, and you're out of there. Something's wrong this time, though, as your contractions begin to intensify. The infant is not moving properly. The pushing is ineffective. The midwife's face grows gloomy. Too much blood is there, and a fog-like quiet descends upon the place. It's the last thing you want to hear during labor. Get the priest. This is where the situation becomes bleak, because it's no longer about medicine once the priest is called. The topic is the afterlife. You're not a lady giving birth anymore. You are a soul, on the verge of redemption. The priest shows up with oil and Latin muttering. The church begins preparing you for the next world as the midwives work to keep your body rooted in this one. Two forces are pulling at your body, by holy protocol and by life. Here's the worst part, though. Death is breathing down your neck and blood is drenching your thighs, but the people around you are still more concerned about the baby's soul than yours. That infant must be baptized. According to theology, it cannot get to paradise if it dies without being baptized. As a result, the midwife's hands are shaking, not merely out of hurry, but also out of metaphysical fear. Even if the baby is still partially inside of you, she may perform an emergency baptism. She believes God will accept it as she whispers the sacred words and sprinkles holy water. I hope she got it properly in this chaotic moment. You're yelling into a pillow, too. Or perhaps you've already ceased yelling. It's possible that your eyesight has gone black. You're still not the focal point of this space. Your body is how you function and create new life. That's what counts. You are the means, the journey, the required pain. You are not the aim. You are the means. Sacred cruelty like this is not exclusive to emergencies. The whole framework of how childbirth is handled incorporates it. Religious orders are assigned to visit laboring women in certain cities. They offer hushed prayers, holy relics, and blessings. These women are viewed as dangerous, liminal beings who are on the brink of death, both spiritually strong and spiritually vulnerable. According to certain customs, women giving birth are not even permitted to handle objects that have been sanctified. You're too near death's door, bleeding and unclean. You are simultaneously holy and impure. Additionally, your soul is perfectly ready for death. The bright side is that. Your penance was paid in blood, and your sins were washed away by suffering. Some people think that if the infant survived, dying during childbirth is akin to martyrdom and a direct ticket to paradise. This concept is ironic, since despite its seeming compassion, it is actually a chilly reassurance. Your passing served a purpose. But let's go back in time. Let's say you make it through. Well done. Although you passed the first exam, the control over your body is not yet complete. By no means. Churching is a set of rituals that closely regulate your postpartum life. You can then be cleaned and brought back to church after roughly 6 weeks. Reintroducing yourself to the sacred realm, you kneel at the altar and listen to a priest pray over you. You are regarded as filthy until then. No matter how faithful you are, it makes no difference. You wait since you are spiritually suspicious due to your bleeding body. You get some rest, or more accurately, you should. Actually, you are needed by your newborn. The house may not clean itself, and your husband may already be impatient. The churching process serves as a reprimand as well as a blessing. It says, "Well done. Now get back in line. You're now a mother, yes, but also reintegrated into society under the same old terms. Obedient, modest. Services are nothing about childbirth changes the power structure. It just gives you another job to do, and if your baby dies, that's another kind of horror. The loss is yours to carry, but the interpretation belongs to others. Maybe God's punishing you, maybe you sinned, maybe your womb is cursed. You'll get looks, pitting ones, skeptical ones, even cruel ones. If you lose more than one child, people stop being subtle. They start calling you barren, unlucky, dangerous. Sometimes you're treated like a human omen. No one says it outright, but the idea seeps in. A woman who cannot bring life safely into the world is something less than a woman. The most painful part, you probably start to believe it. And here's a little-known historical twist. In some parts of Europe, women who died in childbirth were buried with white veils as if they were brides of Christ. Their gravestones often had symbols not of family, but of suffering. A broken lily, a cut-open rose. They were seen as sacrifices, not people. Their deaths were aestheticized, canonized, turned into quiet, cautionary tales. But scholars still debate whether this was all spiritual manipulation or sincere reverence. Were these rituals meant to comfort grieving families? Or were they another layer of control? Another way to frame female suffering as divine duty? The lines blur. Sometimes the answer is both. And yet through all of this, women keep going. They hold their babies. They comfort each other. They develop secret knowledge, tricks to ease the pain, herbs to stop bleeding, songs to calm infants, ways to stitch up wounds with nothing but thread and bravery. The system doesn't give them much, but they build a kind of sisterhood anyway, a web of resilience beneath the official rituals. You learn early. If you want to survive, you need women who understand your body the way the church never will. So tonight, as you close your eyes and the world quiets down around you, think of those women, half saint, half survivor, who lay in dark rooms, gripping hands, sweating through prayer, carving strength from pain. Think of how close they came to death, how often they weren't given the credit, and how often they rose anyway, because that's what women did every day. Somewhere beyond the edge of the village, past the fields, past the shallow stream that ices over in winter, there's a stone wall with high windows and iron-bound doors. Behind it, cloaked in silence and ritual, lives a different kind of woman. Or at least that's what they say. She's not a mother, not a wife, not a witch or a virgin martyr. She's something else entirely. A nun, or maybe a girl who didn't want to marry, or maybe just someone inconvenient. Because in medieval Europe, the cloister is many things. A sanctuary, a prison, a loophole, and a warning. You might be here by choice. Some women are. Maybe you crave solitude or education, or a life where you could think without being watched. But chances are you weren't the one who made the final call. Fathers send daughters to convents like they're solving a math problem. Too many mouths to feed. Send one to God. No doughy, no problem. Become a bride of Christ. Too rebellious, too smart, too mouthy. The cloister will fix her. The walls are thick and the rules stricter than any marriage. And once you're inside, you vanish from the world. Your name changes. Your clothes vanish, traded for a habit, black or white, depending on the order. Your hair is cut short or shaved. You no longer belong to yourself. Your body becomes sacred by becoming invisible. No husband, no children, no household. Just silence, prayer, and an ever-watching eye above. On the surface, it sounds like safety. No childbirth, no unwanted touch, no constant fear of pregnancy or judgment. You rise with the bells, chant the psalms, tend the garden, copy sacred texts. You learn to read if you're lucky, maybe even Latin. You might sing in Latin too, lifting your voice in cold stone halls while the morning sun cuts through high-colored windows. There's peace here, a strange kind of peace. But make no mistake, it's not freedom, not really. 'Cause even in the cloister, your body isn't yours. Your days are scheduled down to the hour. Matins, lauds, tur, sext, nun, vespers, complet. Each prayer is tied to time, and each moment is tied to obedience. If you fall ill, you confess it. If you bleed, you hide it. If you speak too loudly, you're reprimanded. Some convents are strict enough that sisters aren't allowed to talk at all except during designated hours. Imagine living in a world of women and being forbidden to speak. Still, nuns find ways to carve out autonomy. They write. Some become scribes, artists, poets, mystics. Take Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess who composed music, wrote theological treatises, studied plants and medicine, and had visions she insisted were divine. She pushed boundaries from inside the system. She wasn't the only one. Across Europe, cloistered women begin to shape culture in quiet, radical ways. They exchange letters, interpret scripture, compile herbal manuals, even critique church doctrine, just subtly enough not to get burned for it. But others aren't so lucky. For every Hildegard, there's a girl locked away, not for mysticism, but for being born into the wrong moment. Some nuns arrive at age 6 or 7, not knowing why. They're placed in a world they didn't choose, with vows they didn't understand, and told to call it a blessing. In some monasteries, young girls are walled into small one-room cells called anchor holds. Permanent enclosures with no exit. A tiny window allows bread and water. Another lets them hear Mass. They lived like this for decades voluntarily, supposedly. And here's the twisted thing. These anchorites were revered. They were believed to be closer to God, removed from worldly temptation. Pilgrims would come to ask them for advice, leave offerings at their window. Some even gained fame. But if you strip the piety away, what's left is a woman locked in a room until she dies because she refused to fit the mold. And fitting the mold is always the point. Whether you're in a convent or a castle, your role is defined in opposition to men. In the cloister, you're valuable because you don't bear children, because you don't tempt. You become an icon of purity, but only as long as you stay behind the gate. Step outside and suddenly your vow of virginity becomes suspect. The world believes in your sanctity only if you remain out of sight. That suspicion follows you even inside. If you're too pretty, too charismatic, too outspoken, rumors start. Maybe you're hiding something. Maybe you're possessed. Maybe you've got a secret lover. And if a nun becomes pregnant, it's a scandal so big it could bring down the whole convent. Historians still puzzle over these rare but explosive incidents. Some blame wandering monks or corrupt confessors. Some blame the women. But most agree it was always the nun who paid the price. And yet the convent could also be a place of quiet resistance, away from the gaze of husbands and fathers. Some women thrive. They write poetry about love. Not always. Spiritual. They document dreams, record visions, experiment with healing. Some grow old without ever being touched by a man. Some die content buried beneath stone with Latin carved above them. Others die angry or regretful or forgotten. The convent becomes what you make it. If you are devout, it becomes holy. If you are desperate, it becomes refuge. If you are clever, it becomes a mask. But it is never neutral. Your body is still watched, judged, measured by how well you deny it. Tonight, as the light fades from your room and the world outside your window quiets, imagine lying on a narrow cot in a cold stone cell, hands clasped under your chin, reciting the same prayer you've said every night for 20 years, and ask yourself, is this peace, or is this just the most polite version of control? Sleep on it. You wait to the sound of bells and the chatter of the market. And for the first time in a while, you're not giving birth, joining a convent, or facing accusations of witchcraft. You're just walking through the village square, trying to breathe without attracting too much attention. But even here in the open air, your body is a problem. Or rather, it's a spectacle. Because in the medieval world, what you wear isn't just fashion, it's law. And those laws, they're written almost entirely in men. They're called sumptuary laws, and they exist to tell people, especially women, exactly what they can and can't wear based on class, wealth, morality, and marital status. And you're not exempt. No one is. If you're a married woman, you're expected to cover your hair. If you're unmarried but of noble birth, you're allowed certain fabrics but not others. If you're poor, you can forget about silk or fur or even too many layers. And if you're seen wearing something that doesn't match your station, your morality, or your husband's social ambitions, you're in violation. These laws are everywhere. England, France, the Italian city-states, they all had their versions. They might dictate the number of rings you can wear, the kind of embroidery on your sleeves, how many pearls are too many pearls, or even the width of your belt. Yes, the width. Because apparently your belt said a lot about your morals. And then there's color. Red might be banned for you, but reserved for courtesan or noble women. Purple might be off limits unless you're royalty. Gold thread forbidden to all but the elite. It's less about preventing extravagance and more about making sure everyone knows their place. It's social control stitched right into your hemline. And who enforces these laws? Men, of course. Magistrates, clerics, husbands, fathers. They might find you, shame you, or even force you to change clothes in public if they think you've overstepped. Imagine being dragged into a town square and forced to strip off a cloak or have your veil cut in half because someone decided you look too expensive. Now imagine how many men actually got punished for their clothing violations. Spoiler alert, fewer. But it's not just about wealth, it's about visibility. A woman who dresses too finely might be accused of vanity or seduction. A woman who dresses too plainly might be accused of laziness or rebellion. Your appearance becomes a public commentary. You're not just walking through the square. You're making a statement whether you want to or not. And those statements are read by everyone, especially men. Even fashion accessories get political. Veils, for instance, are loaded symbols. In many towns, married women are required actually, to wear a veil in public, not for style, but for modesty. To go unveiled as a married woman, that's scandalous. It implies availability, or arrogance, or even prostitution, depending on who's looking. Some towns had fines for women caught outdoors without the proper head covering, especially if they were of respectable status. Others enforced specific colors or cloth types for widows, brides, or servants. One wrong veil and you've just committed a moral crime. And if you think this only applies to noble women in courtly gowns, think again. Even peasants had standards to follow. You could be fined for wearing a belt too ornate for your class or for wearing shoes that curled too far upward at the toe. Yes, shoe laws were real. In fact, the length of the shoe tip often indicated your status. The longer and pointier the shoe, the richer or more arrogant you were assumed to be. So, of course, women had shorter ones, more practical, less threatening, less noticeable. Some of this sounds ridiculous now, and it was. But it also reveals something deeply sinister, that the female body was considered so disruptive, so volatile, that it had to be literally wrapped up. wrapped in control. If they couldn't control your thoughts, your womb, or your desires, they could at least regulate your shoes, your sleeves, and your neckline. And here's a strange twist. In some places, prostitutes were required to wear specific clothing, bright ribbons, striped cloaks, certain colors to mark them publicly. At first glance, this seems like punishment, but here's the irony. These women often had more freedom to dress boldly than so-called respectable women. They weren't pretending to be modest, so they got to claim visibility in ways wives and daughters never could. Some leaned into it, wore the brightest colors they could turn their punishment into a kind of brand. And don't forget the role of hair. In the medieval imagination, a woman's uncovered hair was basically a flashing neon sign. It symbolized youth, seduction, and sometimes sin. So married women had to keep it covered tightly, neatly, always. There were specific types of headdresses for each stage of life. If you went around with your hair flowing loose as an adult woman, people assumed one of two things. Either you were unmarried and stupid, or you were trying to attract the wrong kind of attention. This obsession bled into art. Paintings of saints always show women with tightly braided, heavily covered hair, unless they're martyrs being stripped and humiliated. Then the hair flows dramatically, wild and shamed. It's a visual cue. Modesty is control, letting your hair down. That's for sinners or corpses. And yet some women pushed back, not always loudly, but in small, clever ways. A rebellious choice of fabric, a veil a little too sheer, a shoe just a bit too pointed. Fashion became a quiet form of protest. You couldn't say what you thought, but you could wear it. Sometimes just enough to get noticed, sometimes just enough to get away with it. Still, the consequences were real. Public shaming, fines, exclusion from church. In some cases, accusations of witchcraft or LWDness followed the wrong outfit. If a woman looked too good at the wrong moment, she could be blamed for inciting sin, even blamed for her own assault, as if her sleeve length made someone else's crime inevitable. Scholars still debate whether these laws were consistently enforced or just symbolic. Some say they were more about moral signaling than daily policing. Others argue they were brutally enforced in certain cities and mostly ignored in others. But the message was clear across the board. Your body must remain legible, predictable, modest, controlled. So tonight, as you curl under your blanket, think of standing in a cold stone street with fabric clinging to your shoulders, knowing that every thread you wear is speaking for you. That even in silence your body is shouting, and the world is always, always listening. There's a chill in the air, not because of the season, but because everyone in the village has suddenly gone quiet. You're not sure why at first until you see her. She's being dragged through the square on the back of a donkey, barefoot, her dress torn, her hair chopped unevenly, like a punishment not even worth finishing. The crowd isn't laughing. They're watching, judging, absorbing the spectacle like it's part of the calendar. This is what they do when a woman steps out of line. Welcome to the public shaming ritual. The medieval equivalent of cancel culture, except with livestock and spit. You've heard the stories, maybe even seen it before. A woman accused of adultery, or maybe just caught in the wrong room at the wrong time. She might be a scold, a term for a woman who talks too much, or too loudly, or too intelligently. She might have ignored a summons. She might have looked at someone the wrong way. Doesn't really matter. What matters is that the village needs to see her punished, and more importantly, needs you to see her punished. Punishment is theater in the Middle Ages. It's not enough to lock someone away or find them. That's too private, too. So, quiet. When a woman defies the role she's been boxed into, her correction needs to be loud, visual, humiliating. That's how you maintain control, by making the consequences visible. You don't just erase someone, you unwrite them in front of everyone. Riding backward on a donkey is one of the classics. The symbolism is clear. She's foolish, inverted, a disruption of order. Sometimes she's forced to hold a sign around her neck naming her crime. Sometimes she's paraded with kitchen tools hanging from her waist, reminders of what she should have been doing. Sometimes she's smeared with soot or garbage, and her hair gone, shorn off like a condemned nun, a symbol of disgrace and lost virtue. Hair matters. It's one of the few things women have some control over. And the church made sure to link it to moral standing. Cutting it wasn't just cosmetic. It was a declaration. You strip a woman's hair, you strip her identity. That's why so many shaming rituals begin with scissors. One snip and she's less than a woman in the eyes of the crowd. Just a body to be looked at. A warning sign on 2 legs, and there's more. The cucking stool, a chair used to dunk women into water, usually for being quarrelome or suspected of adultery. In some villages, it's called the scold's bridle, though that name is better suited for an even worse punishment. A metal muzzle locked around the mouth, with a spike pressing down on the tongue, designed for women who talk too much. You can't even scream in that thing. You just drip and sob and try not to choke while the town laughs or prays or scowls depending on the mood. Then there's the pillory. You're forced to stand in a wooden frame, wrists and head locked in place on display. People throw rotten food, mud, dung. Some shout, others spit. Sometimes the crowd is half drunk and half angry and wholly unpredictable. You're stuck there until someone decides your penance is enough or until your knees give out, whichever comes first. What's disturbing is how gendered all of this is. Men get punished too, sure, but the methods for women almost always target the body in symbolic ways. Public nudity, shaving, binding the mouth. These aren't random choices. They're ways to strip a woman of her social identity to remind everyone watching that her worth depends on modesty, obedience, and chiclins. Step outside those and you become a thing, a lesson. Sometimes shaming rituals are sanctioned by the church. Other times they're community-driven. Folk punishments pass down like family recipes. In either case, they serve the same function. Reassert control, remind everyone where the lines are, remind you what happens if you cross them. And because these rituals are public, they rely on the crowd, on complicity, on everyone watching, even if they don't approve. Even if they whisper later that it was too much, the spectacle needs spectators. And here's the strange part. Sometimes the woman being punished plays along. She doesn't resist. Maybe she's too shocked. Maybe she knows that fighting back only makes it worse. Or maybe in a twisted way, she's reclaiming the narrative. By surviving the shame, by walking through it upright, dumb. She defies its intent to her. She refuses to break, but not always. Sometimes the shame works exactly as designed. You return home shy and silent, eyes down, hands trembling. You become a ghost in your own life, a woman who once was. You're not jailed, but you're not free either. People remember even years later, and the memory sticks to you like smoke. One of the more fringe punishments, so bizarre you almost have to laugh to keep from wincing, involves symbolic animals. Women were sometimes paraded with fake tails attached, likening them to animals in heat. Literal tail shaming. It's both absurd and cruel and deeply revealing. Because underneath all the chants and rituals, what's really being punished is desire. Not just sexual, but social. You wanted something outside the bounds. Respect, independence, pleasure, justice. And now the world wants to drag you back by your hair, or what's left of it. Scholars still argue about how widespread these practices were, and whether they were reserved for extreme cases or used more casually. Some say they were rare, but theatrical, meant to create long-lasting impressions. Others point to local records showing regular incidents. Either way, the message is clear. The community has the right to please your body, and the more visible you are, the more dangerous you become. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, try to imagine what it feels like to walk barefoot on cobblestones while dozens of eyes burn holes in your back. Try to imagine the silence that follows, the quiet after everyone has turned away, convinced they've done the right thing. And you just keep walking because what else is there to do? You weren't the first. And you won't be the last. You hear it in the whispers first. Two girls behind the bread store murmuring about a charm they heard can make someone fall in love. A bundle of herbs tucked under the pillow, a ribbon soaked in wine and knotted with hair. You smile because you know the stories. You've even tried one once when you were 15 and hopelessly smitten with the blacksmith's apprentice. It didn't work. Of course, you barely noticed you, and you were too afraid to push the spell further. Because in your world, love isn't just a feeling. Dang. It's a transaction, a sin, a strategy, and sometimes, if you're desperate enough, a weapon. Love potions are more than superstition. They're a response to a society that gives women no real agency over desire. You're not supposed to choose who you love. You're told who to marry. Your job is to submit, not to long. So, if you fall in love, or want someone, or want to be wanted, there are few paths left to take. Magic is one of them. In medieval Europe, the line between healing and seduction is thin. The same woman who brews a tea for your cramps might also sell you a charm to keep your husband faithful or want to make someone fall into bed with you. These women live on the edges of villages and social order. Not quite witches, not quite saints, just useful. People visit them in secret and then deny it in daylight. The most common ingredients in love potions, herbs like mandre, yarrow, myrtle, and sometimes even animal parts. Some mixtures are harmless. Others could knock you out or cause hallucinations. Some include bodily fluids, blood, spit, even menstrual blood. Yes, you heard that right. The theory goes that the more of you there is in the potion, the stronger the effect. The more personal, the more powerful. Disturbing, maybe, but also telling. Because in a world where you have no control, putting your literal essence into something starts to feel like the only power you have left. And here's where things get morally murky. These potions aren't always about romance. Sometimes they're used for coercion, sometimes to bind a reluctant husband, sometimes to manipulate an encounter that would never happen otherwise. It's the flip side of powerlessness. When no one gives you consent, you stop asking for theirs. And while some women brew these potions with hope, others use them with bitterness. Because when love is impossible, manipulation starts to look a lot like survival. Men use them too, of course, especially men who want access to women who would never look their way. They call it seduction, but it's often just another word for assault glossed over with herbs and prayers. In taverns and alleyways, love potions become date rape drugs by another name. Only there's no modern outrage, no consent discourse, just silence or laughter or accusations, almost always against the woman, no matter who brewed the potion. And the church. The church loathes all of it. Love potions are considered a form of sorcery, an affront to divine will, because love in the eyes of doctrine is supposed to be pure, rational, and controlled by God. Not hormones, not herbs, not desperate teenage girls. Using a love charm is not just a sin. It's a threat to the moral order because it suggests that you want love outside the structure they gave you, that you want affection that's not approved. Some women were punished for this, not with fire usually, but with confession, penance, and social exile. You might be told to fast for weeks or sent to work in a convent garden or forbidden from attending Mass. You might be shamed in public, your name whispered in church as an example of lust unchecked. But more often than not, you're just made into a warning. Someone other girls learn not to imitate out loud anyway. Yet the practice never stops because the need never stops. In a world where marriage is arranged and love is secondary, people crave shortcuts to closeness, spells, herbs, charms. They become the language of the heart that no one else allows you to speak. Even in courtly circles, love magic has its place. Poets write of enchanted rings, of sighs turned to spells, of amulets that awaken passion. The noble version is wrapped in metaphors. The peasant version gets you excommunicated. But they're two sides of the same coin. Whether you're a bored noblewoman hoping to make your night fall harder, or a servant girl trying to keep your betrothed from wandering, you're both reaching for something you're not allowed to claim. Emotional agency. Desire, when you act on it, becomes rebellion. And here's a quirky historical nugget. In some love trials, the men involved actually argued that they were victims of magic, that they wouldn't have committed adultery or dishonored themselves if the woman hadn't enchanted them, and sometimes it worked. The woman was punished. He walked free. Because in a society obsessed with purity, it's always easier to blame the spell than the feelings it uncovered. Scholars still debate how seriously these potions were taken. Were the actual attempts at magic or just folk medicine tangled up in hope? Some say the belief itself was the point, that if you truly believed someone loved you, the potion worked. Others think it was mostly placebo, emotional performance wrapped in ritual. But whether or not the magic was real, the danger was. If someone found the wrong pouch of herbs in your room, if your secret was overheard, if someone got sick after kissing you, it could spiral fast. And still, people kept trying, because love, especially forbidden, impossible love, is one of the few things that makes life bearable when everything else is decided for you. Love potions, as ridiculous or dangerous as they seem now, were never really about magic. They were about longing, about trying to bend the rules when you don't get to write them. So tonight, as the night air presses against your window and your heart starts to slow, think of all the girls who tied knots in ribbons, whispered names into the wind, and slipped tiny vials under their pillows, not to deceive, but to dream. Because sometimes the only way to love in a world built on control is to reach for a little magic, even if it burns you. You're perched on the edge of a velvet-cushioned bench, staring out a narrow castle window. Somewhere in the courtyard below, a knight is practicing his lance technique. The sun catches his armor in brilliant, blinding flashes. He looks noble, powerful, heroic, like something out of a song, and that's exactly the problem, because the songs are everywhere. In your books, your prayer years, your bedtime stories, the knight and the maiden, the rescue, the vow, the sword raised in your name. It's a fantasy you've been fed since you could walk. And it's also a trap. Welcome to the Cheval Code, the medieval rulebook that's less about honor and more about how to romanticize controlling women. The maiden-knight dynamic is the glittering jewel of this fantasy. You, pale and gentle, need protection. He, bold and brave, is the protector. And everyone knows what happens next. He slays a dragon, or wins a jewel, or survives a holy quest, and then he gets you. Maybe not in body if you're pure, but in admiration, obedience, gratitude. Either way, you're the prize and you're not supposed to mind. At first glance, it sounds flattering. A man fights for your honor, writes poems about your eyes, offers his life in exchange for your favor. Not bad, right? But dig deeper, and the whole thing starts to feel like a game where you're the trophy, not the player. Your virtue is his badge of glory. Your name, untouched, angelic, is the banner he carries into battle. You're not supposed to want anything. You're supposed to inspire him to want more, to be better, which is poetic, yes, but also completely one-sided. Chivalry, for all its polished armor and courtly manners, was a masculine performance built on a fantasy of women as passive symbols. The ideal lady was beautiful, silent, modest, and perpetually in need of guidance. She sits in towers, she drops handkerchiefs. She prays for her knight's return, but she does not speak out of turn. She does not lead, and she definitely doesn't get to choose her own knight. That part is almost always arranged. And don't forget, most of this idealized behavior applied only to noble women. Peasant girls weren't part of the Kioalic imagination. No one wrote ballads about farmhands. The entire concept is soaked in classism. Only women who could be placed on pedestals were worthy of this so-called protection. Everyone else just had to hope they weren't in the way when the sword started swinging. But even noble women found themselves trapped. The same man who bows before you in court might demand total obedience at home, because chivalry wasn't legally binding. It was aspirational, a fantasy. Real knights broke vows, assaulted women, started wars, ignored boundaries, and yet, as long as they maintained the performance, wrote the letters, kissed the ring, spoke the poetry, they were praised. You had to remain a virgin, loyal, morally spotless. If the story fell apart, everyone blamed the maiden. You see this double standard everywhere. In the poems of Troilus, the lady is adored from afar, but never heard. Her voice is filtered through the male poet's longing, her thoughts irrelevant, her feelings optional. All that matters is the effect she has on him. She is a mirror, not a person. And if she's bold, if she returns affection with confidence, that's dangerous. Now she's no longer an inspiration, she's a temptation. The moment she stops playing the passive role, the narrative pivots. She becomes the seductress, the corrupter. Think of Guinevere in Arthurian legend. 1 minute she's the beautiful queen whose presence strengthens her king. The next, she's the unfaithful wife whose desires bring down Camelot. Women in these stories are either damsels or disasters. There's rarely a middle ground. Here's a fringe detail that doesn't make it into the bedtime version. Many of these knightly rescues were less about heroism and more about property retrieval. If a noble woman was abducted or ran off, her male relatives would send a knight to retrieve her, not just out of love, but because her absence threatened inheritance lines, doughy claims, and political alliances. The lady's body once again stood in for something else. Territory, wealth, honor. Her actual feelings, not the point. And yet, some women played the game to their advantage. Clever, noble women learned to use the Kioalic script to manipulate their social standing. They wrote letters that hinted at affection while maintaining plausible deniability. They posed as distant, virtuous figures, understanding that little mystery gave them more power than honesty ever could. One woman's cold indifference was another strategy for avoiding a forced marriage. You even had some female authors poking holes in the script. Christine Dean, a 14th century writer and one of the earliest known female professional authors, openly criticized the way chivalric literature turned women into passive objects. She argued that women should be celebrated for wisdom and courage, not just for how well they looked in silk and sorrow. And while her ideas were radical for her time, they caught on with other women living under the weight of romance gone toxic. But the fantasy never died. It just got prettier. Castles, dragons, noble quests, pining love songs. It's seductive stuff. It still is. Even today, we inherit the same tired tropes. The girl waiting to be saved. The man proving his worth through violence or sacrifice. It's everywhere from Disney to dating apps. So, as you lie back tonight, maybe with one arm behind your head and that fan humming softly in the background, ask yourself what kind of story you'd want to live in. One where you wait in a tower or one where you burn the tower down. Because you don't need a knight to rescue you. You need the sword. There's parchment on the table and wax on the floor. A scribe somewhere in a warm corner of a lord's manor is drawing up a contract. Not a treaty, not a land deed, but something far more intimate. A marriage agreement. Only to him, it's not intimate at all. It's property management. And you're the property. In the medieval world, marriage isn't about love. That much you already know, but what often gets overlooked is just how legally binding it is on you. When you marry, you're not just saying yes to a man. You're transferring ownership of your body, your labor, and your legal identity into his hands. You become part of his estate, subject to his rule. This isn't poetic. It's the law. Under most systems of medieval legal thought, Roman, canon, or feudal, marriage turns a woman into something called a theme covert. That means your legal identity is literally covered by your husband's. You can't own property in your own name. You can't sign contracts. You can't sue or be sued independently. If your husband commits a crime and you were with him, it's assumed you are either helping or too dumb to stop him. Both interpretations work against you. Your consent matters only briefly at the altar when you say yes. After that, it's assumed, especially when it comes to your body. The husband's conjugal rights are not romantic, and they're certainly not optional. If he demands sex, you're expected to comply. Refusal can be grounds for punishment, even annulment. And the church. For all its preaching about purity and restraint, it actually codifies these rights. Canon law makes it clear both spouses owe each other the marriage debt, which sounds more like a loan default than intimacy. But in practice, it favors men. Women who say no are seen as disobedient. Men who say no, that's a spiritual failing, not a legal one. And there's the elephant in the room. Marital rape wasn't considered a crime, not by the law, not by the church. Once you're married, your body is assumed to be in a constant state of availability. You can be beaten for disobedience, locked away for infidelity, humiliated for failing to conceive, all within the bounds of marital rights. Your pain becomes part of the furniture. There's a chilling piece of canon law from Gratian's Decretum, a foundational 12th century legal text. It describes how a woman, once married, owes obedience to her husband the way a servant does to a lord. Not out of cruelty, mind you, out of divine order. This isn't about power, it's about God's plan. Neat trick, huh? And it doesn't stop with your body. Your children belong to your husband. If you separate or he dies, the guardianship of your children often goes to his male relatives. You might raise them if they allow it. You have no legal claim. In some regions, widows even have to pay to keep custody. It's not just your womb that's policed. It's everything that comes out of it. Still, you're expected to smile, to be gracious, to perform the role of good wife like it's a religious vocation. You're praised for being patient, gentle, and forgiving, even when forgiveness is the last thing you have left. Literature from the time gushes about the virtues of quiet women. One popular manual compares a good wife to a well-tuned harp, beautiful, obedient, and silent, unless touched by the right hands. And let's say your husband dies, you might think, finally, some freedom. And you'd be partly right. Widows had more legal autonomy than married women. You could inherit land, run a household, even conduct business. But you'd still be pressured to remarry, especially if you were young and fertile. Your womb, remember, is still valuable. And while widows are often depicted as wise and respectable, they're also seen as suspicious, too independent, too wealthy, too free. Here's a strange detail. Some women faked madness to avoid marriage. Others ran away to convents not for God, but for a locked door and a lifetime of not having to belong to someone. In rare cases, their mom don't keep women petition the church for annulment. Not because they didn't love their husbands, but because they never gave proper consent. Some cases were successful, most weren't. After all, consent is a slippery thing when your family signs it on your behalf at age 12. The law doesn't always need violence to control you. Sometimes it just needs paperwork, contracts, customs, social pressure. You're taught that your purpose is to marry, that your worth lies in being wanted. So when the law says you now belong to someone else, you're supposed to feel honored, blessed, elevated. But what you actually feel is erased. There were exceptions, of course. Powerful, noble women who managed estates, acted as regents, even fought legal battles. Elelana of Aquitaine, Matilda of Tuscany. They bent the system to their will, but they were the outliers. The rule was silence, obedience, disappearance, and scholars still argue about how much say women had in all this. Some believe the marriage laws were softened by local custom, mothers whispering advice, aunts helping negotiate kinder matches. Others argue it was stricter than we realize, especially in rural areas where traditions were enforced more rigidly. The truth probably lies in the gray space between a world where small resistances flickered beneath a mountain of control. Tonight, as your body sinks into the mattress and the room settles into shadow, imagine signing away your voice. Imagine giving everything to someone who sees you not as a person, but as a piece of the estate. And then imagine smiling like they taught you to do. Because what other choice do you have? Sleep property. It's late and the streets are dim. The tavern's starting to quiet. The priests long since tucked into their vespers. But there's one type of woman still working. Not behind a loom, not in a kitchen, on the corner, in a doorway, draped in fabrics that flicker in firelight, face painted, posture open because it has to be. She's a prostitute. And in the medieval world, she's both a necessity and a sin. Welcome to the strangest corner of medieval womanhood. Reviled, required, and very rarely respected. You wouldn't think this job would have a place in a society so obsessed with purity. But here's the contradiction. Prostitution was everywhere. In big cities and sleepy towns, near ports, near universities, even near monasteries. And while the church officially condemned it, called it immoral, a danger to the soul, an invitation to hell, it also tolerated it, regulated it, even in some places taxed it. Because the same men preaching chastity on Sundays were creating the demand every other night of the week. The logic was twisted but consistent. Men were weak. Their desire had to go somewhere. And better it go to a woman already fallen than risk corrupting a virgin or a respectable wife. It was considered a lesser evil. One church official even described prostitutes as the sewers of the city. Gross, yes, but necessary to keep the rest of society clean. That's the role you're given. Human filtration system for male desire. Of course, the prostitutes themselves didn't get a say in that metaphor. You might be there by choice or not. Poverty pushed many women into the trade. Abandoned widows, orphans, women who'd lost dowies in fires or floods or bad luck. Some were sold by desperate families. Others were trafficked across borders. A few, believe it or not, entered voluntarily, not because it was easy, but because it was better than starving. Because they could make their own money. Because in a world that owned their bodies anyway, they figured they might as well get paid for it. And pay it did. In prosperous towns, some prostitutes earned decent money, enough to rent a room, feed themselves, even buy finer clothes than proper women could afford. That's part of what made them so threatening. A woman who made money from her body was seen as dangerous, independent, outside the system. So cities did everything they could to control them. Some places established red light districts, literal streets of sin. In Venice, it was the Carampan. In Paris, the Rukra. In London, Suffolk. These areas were tolerated but tightly regulated. Brothel were licensed, watched, sometimes run by local authorities. The women were often required to register, pay fees, wear certain clothing, like yellow veils or striped gowns to mark them as fallen. Think of it like a uniform but humiliating. And if you broke the rules, the punishments were creative. Fines, public shaming, forced haircuts, flogging, sometimes all of the above. Because as much as men relied on sex work, they also needed to visibly condemn it to prove they weren't approving it. That's how the hypocrisy stayed intact. But the worst wasn't the public punishment. It was the moral isolation. You're barred from church, from marriage, from the marketplace in some towns. You can't own property in others. Your children, if you have. Them carry your stain. You become the living embodiment of sin, not because you're evil, but because you're useful, and yet you exist in a strange space. You know things most women don't. You know about male desire. Not the holy version, not the sanitized version, the real thing. You know how it works, how to navigate it, how to manipulate it if you have to. You hear confessions in the dark. You see the town's most respected men reduced to stammering boys. You see priests, merchants, nobles. Everyone comes to you eventually. You become a shadow therapist, a secret keeper, a fantasy in flesh, and sometimes, despite all odds, you carve out a strange kind of community. Some brothel are run by older women who look after their girls, like a mother hen. Strict but protective. There are rules, no violence, no drunken clients, no theft. Some women develop friendships here they never found at home. They eat together, pray together, even in whispered Latin on cold floors, hoping that God sees past their labels. Still, you're never safe. You can be attacked, robbed, murdered, and the law won't rush to help. If you're raped, it's not considered rape. You're already fallen, they say, as if consent becomes irrelevant once you've sold it once, as if your body becomes a public object stripped of autonomy by the act of survival. There's one haunting detail that sticks with you. In some cities, brothels were built near hospitals. Why? Because sick men were considered less dangerous, or because women once sick themselves, often with untreated infections, were sent directly across the street. It was efficient, horrifyingly efficient. But then there were places where the profession was elevated briefly, strangely. In some parts of Renaissance Italy, courtesans were considered cultured, educated companions. They read poetry, debated philosophy, played instruments. They were lovers and muses to powerful men. Think Veronica Franco in Venice, poet, provocateur, legend. But even those women walked a knife's edge. Their fame made them targets. Their intellect made them dangerous. One wrong rumor, and they were back in the gutter or on trial witchcraft. Historians still argue about how much agency medieval sex workers actually had. Were they victims, survivors, entrepreneurs? Probably all three, depending on the day. What's certain is that they lived in constant contradiction, were ripped in the dark, shamed in daylight, needed and never respected. And so tonight, as the streets outside your window empty and your pillow welcomes the weight of your head, think of a woman slipping out of a doorway, coins clinking in a pouch at her waist. She's tired but standing, judged but still here. And in a world that insists on owning your body, maybe survival is its own kind of defiance. Sleep gently, sinner and saint. Morning light filters through stained glass, casting delicate reds and golds onto the stone floor. You're in church again, kneeling among dozens of other women, head bowed, but your eyes flicker up, not toward the altar, not toward the priest, but toward the statue in the niche above him. There she is, tall, serene, and radiant, the Virgin Mary, her arms open, her head bowed in quiet majesty. No blood, no bruises, no children clinging to her skirts, just holiness in a blue robe. This is what you're told to be always. A mother, but a virgin. A woman, but not of the world. Desired, but never desiring. It's impossible. The cult of the Virgin Mary blooms in the medieval period like a garden of contradictions. She becomes not just a religious figure, but the model of ideal womanhood. She's everything you're supposed to be and everything you'll never manage to become. Pure, obedient, gentle, silent. She's motherhood without mess, pregnancy without sex, suffering without bitterness. She's not just your spiritual guide. She's the impossible measuring stick pressed against every part of your life. And here's the real kicker. While Mary is glorified, actual mothers are policed, scorned, even punished for their bodies. You bleed during childbirth. That's a sin-stained process. You struggle with lust. That's Eve rearing her ugly head again. But Mary makes motherhood look divine, untouched. She's never caught crying in the middle of the night, never cursed by a bad husband, never bruised by childbirth. Her labor is silent. Her child is perfect. Her sacrifice is revered but abstract. And yet medieval women love her genuinely, desperately, because even though she's out of reach, she's also the only feminine divine figure they're allowed to connect with. You can't pray to God as a woman and expect comfort. But Mary, she might understand. You beg her for fertility, for safe childbirth, for protection. You place candles before her image. You whisper prayers into folded hands, hoping she'll soften the punishments men have justified with scripture. She becomes a sacred loophole. When no one else will listen to your pain, you turn to the woman in blue. And if you're lucky, sometimes you feel heard. But this adoration has strings attached. The church uses Mary as a behavioral template. Want to be holy? Be like her. Be modest. Be self-sacrificing. Be chaste. That's the model. Anything else? A woman who speaks up, seeks pleasure, owns land, refuses a man. That's a deviation. That's not divine. That's disorder. This creates a cruel binary. You can be Mary or you can be Eve. There's no in-between. And since no living woman can actually be Mary, virgin and mother, selfless and powerful, eternally serene, you're always falling short, always closer to Eve than you'd like to admit. The virgin becomes not just an ideal, but a weapon, a constant reminder of your own unworthiness. You see it everywhere, in sermons, in stained glass, in pageants and plays. Mary hovers over your life like a holy shadow. In childbirth, she's there. In your wedding vows, her name is invoked. Even in death, she's supposed to welcome you if you've been pure enough. She's the patroness of women. And yet, she never lived your life, never worked in the fields, never buried a stillborn, never took a beating for speaking out of turn. She's both your refuge and your rebuke. And the art, oh, the art. Mary is painted more than any other woman in history. She's shown nursing the Christ child, her breast exposed, but somehow still chaste. She's crowned in gold, her eyes downcast. She's floating, elevated, untouched by gravity or grief. Meanwhile, images of real women, especially women accused of sin, are raw, harsh, full of punishment and pain. Compare Mary to Mary Magdalene. One is light, the other shadow. One is grace, the other guilt. The message is crystal clear. Be one or be damned. Still, some women try to bridge the gap. They become nuns, devoting their lives to imitating the Virgin. Some mystics even claim spiritual marriages to Christ, casting themselves as miniaries. They embrace chastity, obedience, and suffering. And occasionally, their visions gain traction. They write about being filled with divine love or pierced by holy desire. These writings are both beautiful and disturbing. You can't help but notice how often they describe pain in sensual terms. Holiness starts to sound like arousal. It's a reminder that even when women try to be purely spiritual, the body, the messy human female body, always bleeds through. And here's a strange little detail. Some medieval theologians argued over whether Mary even gave birth in the usual way. There were long debates about whether Christ passed through her womb like light through glass. Why? Because admitting that the Virgin bled or suffered during labor would make her too human, too real. And if she was real, she wasn't perfect. And if she wasn't perfect, then the whole model falls apart. So they decided she didn't bleed. She didn't tear. She didn't scream. She just delivered a savior like it was a sunrise. Quiet, radiant, painless. And you, standing with blood between your thighs, weeping over another miscarriage or hating your body for its cravings, are left with the aftermath, a standard that demands the impossible and a faith that punishes the real. Some women quietly start to push back. They paint Mary holding herbs or healing the sick. They write poems that focus on her strength, not her purity. They talk to her like a sister, not a goddess. And through these little acts, they start to remake her in their own image. Still sacred, but also earthly. The Mary who understands pain, not just perfection. Still the official version remains, and you're left chasing it like a ghost. trying to be pure but fertile, silent but strong, obedient but useful. A mother with no stain, a woman with no want, a body that serves without ever being its own. So tonight, as you lie in the dark, whisper your prayer, not to the men who wrote the rules, but to the woman in blue. Ask her what it feels like to be adored by everyone, but understood by no one. And then close your eyes, because even saints get tired. It starts with a glance. Nothing serious, just a man eyeing you from across the marketplace while you haggle for onions. But his look lingers too long, and suddenly the air around you shifts. It's not a compliment, it's a test. If you meet his eyes, you're inviting sin. If you don't, you're rude or haughty. Either way, your body is now the focus of a moral performance that has absolutely nothing to do with you, because in the medieval world, a woman's desire isn't just taboo, it's dangerous. And even worse, a woman who awakens desire in men is blamed for their downfall. You're used to the warnings by now. They're in every sermon, every story. Guard your gaze. Do not tempt your brothers. A woman's beauty is the devil's trap. You're told that your very existence causes others to sin, and that your virtue is measured not by what you do, but by what you cause. If someone desires you, that's your fault. If someone sins because of you, that's on you too. And it's not just about lust. It's about power. Because when a woman expresses desire, when she wants something or someone or shows even the smallest hint of pleasure, she disrupts the entire structure. You weren't made to want, you were made to be wanted. That's the script. And any deviation, that's rebellion, which makes you not just immoral, but unstable, untrustworthy, possibly possessed. It sounds dramatic, but it's everywhere. In literature, the women who desire always bring ruin. Think of Helen of Troy. Her face launched ships, and somehow that's her crime. Think of Guinevere, who dares to love Lancelot and is blamed for the collapse of a kingdom. Think of Eve, always Eve, reaching, tasting, ruining it for everyone. Medieval thinkers didn't invent this trope. They inherited it, sure, but boy did they double down on it. There's even theology to back it up. Church fathers like Jerome and Augustine wrote endless treatises warning men against the dangers of female flesh. Women, they said, were naturally more carnal, more tempting, more suspicious. The idea was that men sin, yes, but only because women invite them to. In this worldview, your body isn't a body. It's a weapon. And it doesn't matter what you think or feel. All that matters is what someone else sees in you. So, what happens when you feel desire? Simple. You hide it. You learn to swallow it, to suffocate it before it can be noticed. You walk with your eyes down, cover your hair, speak softly. You pray when your body pulses at night, asking God to cleanse your dreams. You learn to fear yourself, and if you don't, if you act on it, even in the smallest way, you become a story, a warning. The girl who danced too freely, the wife who looked too long at the wrong man, the widow who remarried too soon. Every woman who stepped outside the narrow margins of holy femininity is transformed into folklore, into shame. Even the most innocent pleasure becomes suspect. Do you laugh too loudly at a man's joke? Do you enjoy dancing? Do you ask for a song to be repeated because you like how it makes you feel? It doesn't take much. You start to perform chastity, not just with your body, but with your whole personality. You censor your joy, your curiosity, your appetite. Because in this world, a hungry woman, any kind of hunger, is a threat. And here's a bizarre little historical gem. Some medieval men believed women had insatiable sexual appetites. That's right. The same women they silenced and shamed were also feared as walking furnaces of lust. There's even a belief that a woman's womb could itch for seed. And, if left unsatisfied, it would wander. Yes, again with the wandering womb. So, in one breath, women are frigid, modest, pious, and in the next, they're sex-obsessed and manipulative. Basically, no matter what you do, you're too much. And if you're too desirable, you must be using magic. That's how the logic works. Beauty, a form of suspicion. A lovely voice, a graceful body. These aren't just gifts. They're signs of supernatural influence. Maybe you've snared someone. Maybe you've cursed them. Maybe you're a temptress in league with the devil. Never mind that the same men accusing you were the ones writing courtly poems about fair maidens just last week. Even women's clothing is politicized. A bright dress, a hint of undid hair, a neckline that reveals a little too much. That's not fashion, it's provocation. If something happens to you, it's because you invited it. This is the original version of victim blaming sewn into law, liturgy, and legend. And yet, desire persists. You fall in love. You fantasize. You dream of kissing someone not because you were told to, but because you want to. And that simple fact that you want is both exhilarating and terrifying, because it means your body belongs to you, not just to God, your father, your husband, or the law. Some women push back quietly, secretly. They write poems about love, not always spiritual. They hide letters in hymns. They pass glances in church pews. A few even run off with lovers, abandoning their dowies and their reputations. Most are punished, of course, but some slip through the cracks. Some find small happinesses between the rules. Some find moments of joy that no priest or judge can take away. Historians debate how much space medieval women really had for desire. Some argue that the strictness was more theoretical than enforced, that everyday people were more pragmatic than their priests, that women found ways to live full, complex, emotional lives in spite of the rules. Others say the grip of the church was absolute, that shame soaked into every aspect of female experience. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, a patchwork of repression and resistance. Either way, the pattern is clear. Female desire had to be pleased. Not because it was evil, but because it was powerful, because it refused to stay in the neat little box built for it, because it dared to want. So tonight, as your heart quiets and your limbs grow heavy beneath the blankets, think of a girl sitting in candlelight, quill in hand, writing a name she's not supposed to say out loud. Think of the risk she takes with every word. Think of the heat in her chest, not sin, not shame, just want. And let that be enough, because your desire was never the problem. Their fear of it was, you're not supposed to wait. That much has been drilled into you since birth. Women obey, women submit, women endure. That's the order of things. But the truth is, not every woman does. Some push back quietly, cleverly, or with blazing fury. You won't read their names in the official chronicles, carved into stone by men with careful hands. But they're there between the lines, in court records, in folk songs, in the panic of those who tried and failed to keep them silent. These are the women who fought back against the control of their bodies, and they did it in ways big and small. Start with the simplest acts. Refusal. A girl says no to an arranged marriage, not dramatically. She just drags her feet, cries too loudly, pretends to be sick, runs away to the convent, fakes a vision. Not exactly a sword-swinging rebellion, but effective. If she's clever, she stalls long enough for the suitor to lose interest or for her parents to reconsider. And at times, that's all it takes. A well-timed stomachache, a divine dream, a sister who covers for her. In a world that offers you almost no control, even a delay is a victory. Then there are the women who push further, who speak up, who take their grievances to court. Yes, actual court. Medieval Europe wasn't lawless. In fact, it was bogged down in endless rules and procedures. And sometimes women used those rules to their advantage. A wife accused of adultery might counters sue for abuse. A midwife banned from practicing might argue that she saved more lives than the local priest. A widow might defend her right to her late husband's land, sometimes winning, sometimes not, but always refusing to fade. One of the most powerful tools a woman could wield, words. In a world where her body was heavily policed, her voice became a weapon of its own. There are records of women composing ballads about their lives, lamenting injustices, or mocking the men who tried to control them. Some are anonymous, others survived under pseudonyms, but they're biting, bold, often funny, in that way that barely hides a snarl. And then there are the riots. Yes, you heard that right. Women, peasants, fishwives, washerwomen starting riots. When food prices rose or wages were cut, women led protests in town squares, throwing rotten produce and insults with equal force. They stormed bakeries. They blocked tax collectors in Paris, in London, in Florence. They made their presence known. Often dismissed as disorderly mobs, they were anything but. These were women defending their families, their survival, their dignity. Here's a Lesurque, known but fascinating case. In 14th century France, a woman named Jeanne de Lesson turned pirate after her husband was executed by the king. She sold her estate, bought ships, and launched a personal war on French nobility, targeting their vessels, executing prisoners, and becoming a legend known as the Lioness of Brittany. She wasn't fighting for ideology. She was fighting for revenge, for justice, for herself. And it wasn't always about violence or spectacle. Some women resisted through subversion. They used their roles, wife, mother, servant, as cover. They passed messages for rebel movements, smuggled banned texts, taught girls to read when no one was looking. One nun in a German abbey wrote letters to a male theologian challenging his interpretations of scripture respectfully but firmly. She never left the convent, never raised a weapon, and yet her words traveled farther than most knights ever did. Of course, not all acts of resistance were noble or clean. Some women poisoned abusive husbands. Others lied, blackmailed, seduced for power. This wasn't a fairy tale rebellion. It was messy, morally gray, often desperate, but that doesn't make it less real. When the system is rigged, even a dirty trick can be a kind of justice. And let's not forget the small rebellions. A woman who lets her hair down in public, a girl who wears a forbidden color, a wife who refuses to kneel. These are moments so tiny they barely register in the official record. But they mattered. They were sparks, and sometimes sparks spread. Scholars still argue about how common this resistance really was. Some say it was rare, exceptional. Others argue it was constant, just hidden, unrecorded, dismissed. What we do know is this. Women found ways to survive, to bend the rules, to bite back when they could. And in doing so, they carved out cracks in the walls built around them, not enough to escape entirely, but enough to breathe. And those cracks, sometimes they grew. Sometimes one woman's defiance inspired another's. A midwife tells her apprentice, "Don't let them scare you." A mother whispers to her daughter, "There's more than one way to live." Resistance like faith spreads in secret. So tonight, as the wind brushes your window and your bones settle into rest, think of the woman who stood up in the market and shouted when she wasn't supposed to. Think of the girl who ran, who wrote, who fought, who spat back at the world that told her to kneel. You don't know her name, but she made space for herself and maybe for you. Not every revolution wears armor. It begins, as these things often do, with a whisper, then a rumor, then a letter. The nuns are acting strange, or maybe it's a girl who won't stop speaking in tongues, a woman who won't eat, a woman who won't stop eating, a woman who bleeds without a wound, who cries salt, who levitates, who prays until she collapses. By the time anyone tries to explain it, it's already too late. You're not dealing with ordinary piety anymore. You're standing in the presence of a female saint or a lunatic or something in between. The medieval world didn't really know what to do with women who actually claimed religious authority. Not the docile ones in wimples, murmuring psalms. Those were fine, predictable, contained. But the wild ones, the visionaries, the mystics, the ones who claimed God spoke to them personally and told them things no man wanted to hear, those women terrified everyone. and yet they existed more than you'd think. In Italy, there's Catherine of Siena writing letters to popes and telling them off for cowardice. In Germany, there's Hildegard of Bingen composing operas and describing visions in detailed, color-coded symphonies. In the Low Countries, a woman named Hadvich writes erotic poetry about union with God that makes even modern readers blush. These weren't quiet little nuns. They were forces of nature, and they had the nerve to believe that holiness didn't require male permission. Their bodies became the battleground. These women often experienced what today we might call psychosomatic symptoms, wounds that appeared without cause, fevers without heat, ecstasies so intense they collapsed from them. Catherine stopped eating altogether, claiming she was nourished only by the Eucharist. Her body withered to the point that she could barely stand, but her voice loud as ever. Hildegard described migraines that came with divine visions, followed by months of writing that left her hands cramped and her lungs ragged. There, suffering became their badge, proof that God had touched them, or depending on who you asked, proof that they'd gone mad. There's a strange freedom in being called insane. These women, so long as they wrapped their visions in religious language and balanced their ecstasies with obedience, at least in public, were sometimes allowed to be powerful. Not because men trusted them, but because their pain made them safe. You can't accuse a woman of pride when she's half-starved and covered in her own blood. And yet, some of them were proud. Proud of their divine connection, proud of their influence, proud of the way bishops and kings bent down to listen. Then why shouldn't they be? They'd turned a rigged system inside out. In a world where women's voices were barely tolerated in their own homes, here were women dictating theology to the highest powers in Europe. Not because they were invited, but because they couldn't be ignored. Still, it was a dangerous tightrope. Mystics walked a line between sanctity and heresy. If your visions fit the church's narrative, saint material. If they challenged authority, suddenly you're suspect. Several women who claimed divine visions were silenced, imprisoned, or burned. Joan of Arc, the teenage peasant girl who said saints spoke to her and told her to lead an army, was executed for heresy and cross-dressing. Later, they canonized her, but not before setting her on fire. And here's the complicated part. These women often reinforced the same system they subverted. They praised obedience, chastity, and spiritual suffering. They told other women to serve, to submit, to fast, until their skin clung to their bones. But at the same time, their very existence challenged everything those teachings were supposed to uphold. Because deep down, their message wasn't just be holy. It was God speaks to me. Not to your husband, not to your priest, to me. And some women listened. You see little ripples. A girl in a small village begins to write her own prayers. A mother teaches her daughter how to meditate. Women start forming informal devotional circles outside the church's direct oversight. They read mystical texts, not just the Psalms. They copy letters, discuss symbols, create their own rituals. In Germany, the Begins, a lay religious community, grows out of this energy. Independent, female-led, charitable, and slightly heretical. No vows, no husbands, just women living together, working, praying, and surviving outside the cloister. Not everyone is happy about this. Local authorities begin cracking down. Bishops declare unauthorized spiritual movements dangerous. Orders are given to dissolve communities, burn writings, silence the overly inspired. The same church that canonized mystic women turns on them when their holiness stops being useful. Power, especially female power, is only tolerated when it's safely framed. Strip the frame away, and suddenly your visions are dangerous. And yet, the mystics endure. Their writings survive. Their influence lingers. Even centuries later, scholars read their words and marvel at the tension between obedience and rebellion, silence and voice, ecstasy and agony. They were caught in a system designed to erase them, and they made themselves unforgettable anyway. So, what does it mean to be holy in a world that uses holiness to control you? What does it mean to embrace spiritual pain when your pain is already expected, even demanded? What does it mean to hear a voice that tells you you're more than just a womb or a warning sign? Tonight, as the room goes still and your breath grows soft, imagine yourself lying in a dark cell, your hands clasped over a chest too empty to feed you, your heart full of something you can't quite name. Maybe it's hunger, maybe it's grace, maybe it's rage that burns so clean it feels divine. Whatever it is, it's yours, and no one gets to rewrite it. Imagine stepping out into a crisp morning, pulling your cloak tightly around your shoulders, and no one notices you're not what they've been. Your hair is tucked beneath a cap, your chest bound, your gait deliberate. You pass by laborers and merchants and priests, and not one of them looks twice. To them, you're just another man, a novice monk, a messenger boy, a clear in training. You've slipped the net of womanhood, at least for today. And in the medieval world, that's more than rebellion. It's survival. For most people back then, gender is destiny. It's written into the law, the scripture, the clothes you wear, the way you walk, and yet, scattered throughout history like footprints barely visible in the mud, are people who lived outside those rigid lines. Some dressed differently, some lived as another gender entirely, some resisted definition altogether. And though medieval Europe didn't have the language we use today, no non-binary, no transgender, it certainly had people who defied the roles they were given. Start with the cross-dressers. That's the label historians like to use, though it doesn't come close to the complexity of what was actually happening. Sometimes it was about necessity. A woman wanted to travel alone or escape an abusive marriage, so she dressed as a man. Other times, it wasn't about opportunity. A girl wanted to study, work, or fight. Jobs forbidden to her as a woman, so she put on brides and stepped into a different world. And sometimes it was about identity. People who lived as men for years, not days, who joined monasteries, who took male names, who became part of their communities. Were they trans men in the modern sense? Maybe, maybe not. The language fails us, but what's clear is that they lived as someone other than what they were assigned, and in doing so, they reshaped what was possible. One of the most well-known examples is Saint Marinos, or Marina the monk. According to legend, Marina's father didn't want to leave her behind when he joined a monastery. So she disguised herself as a boy and entered the monastic life. She lived there for years, undetected. At one point, she was falsely accused of fathering a child and took the punishment silently, never revealing her identity. Only after her death did the monks discover the truth, and by then, she was a saint. Then there's the curious case of Joan of Arc, whose armor and short hair caused almost as much controversy as her visions. During her trial, her refusal to wear women's clothing was brought up again and again. It wasn't just about defiance. It was considered a sin. Her male dress was seen as evidence of heresy, of unnatural inness, and yet she insisted on it. She said it was safer, more appropriate for her role as a soldier, that God approved. They burned her anyway, but not everyone was punished. Some passed so well or lived in such remote places that their stories never made it into the firelight of scrutiny. A peasant woman becomes a brother and tends sheep without question. A butcher's assistant lives as a man for decades, marries a woman, and is only discovered upon death. Sometimes communities look the other way. Sometimes they know and simply don't care, especially if the person is useful, kind, quiet. Survival breeds tolerance in strange places. Still, the risks were high. If you were caught living outside your assigned gender, the consequences range from ridicule to torture. Accusations of deception, charges of heresy, you could be excommunicated or worse. Because it wasn't just about clothes, it was about order, about a worldview in which men and women had clearly defined roles, and stepping outside of them was seen as dangerous, unnatural. And here's the strange part. The church actually allowed for some ambiguity under specific conditions. Female saints who lived as male monks were often venerated after their deaths, once they were no longer threatening. Their cross-dressing was reframed as a form of spiritual sacrifice. Look how she gave up her femininity for God. The texts say, never mind that she may not have seen it as a sacrifice at all. It was a convenient way to explain away behavior that didn't fit the mold. This kind of posthumous rebranding happened a lot. Deviance became piety. Dissonance became allegory. A woman who lived as a man wasn't seen as asserting a different identity. She was protecting her purity, hiding from temptation, a tragic figure, not an empowered one. And by the time the church was done polishing the story, the original person had been buried beneath layers of doctrine and denial. Even in popular culture, gender nonconformity had a role. Usually comic, usually cruel. The medieval carnival, for instance, loved to play with gender swapping. Men dressed as women, women as men. Priests mocked themselves in drag. It was seen as subversive, ridiculous fun, but only because everyone understood it as temporary. Once the mask came off, order was restored. The joke was over. What wasn't allowed was permanence, and yet people still lived it. In convents and monasteries, on ships, in fields, in the gaps between towns. Some may have felt trapped in the wrong body. Others simply refused the roles assigned to them. Some were interrex, assigned a gender by a midwife who couldn't understand what she saw and had to pick something. Their lives are hard to trace, erased, misinterpreted, recast, but they were there, always have been. Modern historians continue to debate these figures. Were they trans? Were they queer? Were they saints or rebels or just survivors? There's no single answer. But what matters is that they existed. They challenged the system with nothing but cloth, posture, and silence. And in doing so, they created space. Not much, not enough, but space. So tonight, as you settle under the weight of your blanket and the room folds into stillness, think of someone standing in the morning mist, chest bound, heart steady, walking into a day that does not expect them, a day they will claim anyway. A life shaped by risk, yes, but also by choice. And in a world that offers you none, that's a kind of miracle. You walk into a room and everything stops. Not because you're famous, not because you're powerful, because you're bleeding or about to bleed or suspected of bleeding. And suddenly, everyone's got an opinion about your body. The air shifts. Men clear their throats, look away. Women glance sideways, trying to gauge your timing, your smell, your posture. You're not sick. You're just a woman in a world that doesn't understand your bodies and has spent centuries turning that ignorance into fear. This is the anatomy of medieval fear. And at the center of it, med and evil science, if we can call it that, wasn't exactly the shining beacon of progress. Most medical knowledge about women came from ancient sources copied and recopied through the lens of male anxiety. Galen, Aristotle, Hippocrates, those were the big names. None of them had actually dissected a woman's body. Their theories relied on assumption, hearsay, and some truly wild guesses. And yet, their ideas shaped the way medieval Europe understood your body for hundreds of years. Take the uterus, for example. It's not just an organ, it's a creature. Some physicians genuinely believed it could wander, drift around your body like a ghost, bumping into organs, blocking your throat, clouding your mind. If you were hysterical, melancholic, fainting, or even just too emotional, the diagnosis was often wandering womb. Their cure, smelly herbs, sweet scents near your nose to draw the uterus back down, foul ones near your feet to push it into place like trying to hurt a cat with incense. Then there's menstruation. Medieval scholars couldn't decide if it was a divine punishment, a natural necessity, or a monthly purge of toxins. Some claimed menstrual blood was corrosive, that it could dull mirrors, rust iron, wither crops. There's a charming theory that if a menstruating woman touched wine, it would spoil. Butter, it wouldn't. Churn bees, they'd die. No pressure, and yet, despite the terror, the bleeding had to happen. If you didn't menstruate, doctors assumed the blood was collecting inside you, rotting, poisoning your body, warping your mind. It was this same thinking that made women inherently colder and wetter than men. Medicine was all about the four humors, and women, by this theory, were unbalanced from birth. More susceptible to illness, more emotional, less rational. Basically, a walking imbalance in need of constant adjustment, and the treatments don't get your hopes up. Cupping, bleeding, purging, and potions of dubious origin. You might be fed crushed pearls or powdered animal bones, told to lie still with a live frog strapped to your belly, advised to drink boiled herbs until you vomit or hallucinate. Both signs the treatment is working. Most female ailments were attributed to the womb. Regardless of symptoms, toothache, the womb, headache, the womb, irritability, definitely the womb. Here's where it gets worse. Even childbirth, the most sacred female experience, was treated like a terrifying biological mystery. Male doctors wrote about it from a distance, basic conclusions on second-hand reports from midwives they barely respected. They believed the baby could flip randomly in the womb if the mother had bad thoughts, that loud noises could startle the fetus into the wrong position, that the baby was formed from the man's seed and the woman was just the vessel. Less architect, more delivery system. One particularly disturbing theory held that a woman could imprint a deformity on her child just by looking at the wrong thing during pregnancy. See a monkey? Give birth to a monster. Think sinful thoughts? The baby's cursed. Women were blamed for everything that went wrong in childbirth, not because they did anything, but because their minds and bodies were considered unstable. Even anatomy books were suspect. You might imagine elegant drawings of reproductive systems, delicately labeled, but most were vague, symbolic, and inaccurate. Some were copied from classical sources over and over without question. The uterus was drawn as a small oven, complete with doors, sometimes as a vase. In one particularly famous manuscript, it looks like a flask with horns, because that's science, apparently. And this fear bled into law. If a woman miscarried, especially without witnesses, she could be accused of infanticide or witchcraft. If she survived a difficult birth, it was considered divine favor. If she died, it was divine punishment, or worse, a sign of hidden sin. The line between biology and morality blurred until every bodily function became suspect. But here's the thing. Women knew better. Not always in scientific terms, but in experience. Midwives passed down real practical knowledge. They knew which herbs helped with pain, which teas soothed cramps, which positions made birth safer. Their anatomy was based on observation, not theory, and yet their knowledge was often dismissed as folk magic or superstition, useful in emergencies, expendable in writing. There's one story of a woman who tried to explain to a male physician what she felt during labor, where the pain moved, what helped, what didn't. He told her she was wrong, that her experience didn't match the books, as if her own body had lied to her. Historians now argue over how much actual influence women had on medieval medical practices. Some claim midwives had far more authority than we assume. Others argue that male physicians gradually pushed them out, seizing control as medicine became more formalized. What's certain is that fear ruled the conversation. Fear of bleeding, of birth, of female power disguised as flesh. And that fear shaped everything. It justified controlling your movements, your dress, your speech, your access to education, because a woman's body wasn't just misunderstood, it were feared. And fear breeds control. So tonight, as you lie still and your heart slows, think of a girl sitting on a stool while someone presses a stinking pus to her belly, muttering prayers she doesn't understand. Think of her clenching her teeth, not from pain, but from the knowledge that she knows her body better than any of them, and yet no one's listening. Let the hum of your fan soothe that ache. You're not a vessel. You're not a riddle. You're not their fear. You're just a person. You're standing in the corner of a quiet tavern, half hidden in shadow, listening to the creak of wood and the murmur of voices. You've been here before, more times than anyone would guess. Not because you enjoy the ale or the smoke or the heat, but because this is where deals are made, secrets distributed, and lives yours included are negotiated behind closed doors. You're a woman, yes, but tonight you're also a business owner or a landholder or a widow with a knife hidden in her skirts. You've learned where the loopholes are and, more importantly, how to slip through them without a sound. Medieval life isn't all iron chains and locked gates. For all its rigid rules and suffocating roles, it's also full of cracks. And where there are cracks, women find ways to live. You've been told your body doesn't belong to you, that your choices are limited, that your place is fixed. But if you're clever, if you're quiet, if you watch closely, you can find the hidden roots. You learn to listen for what isn't said. You learn to speak in gestures, in double meanings. You learn how to bend the system without breaking it, because breaking it gets you burned. Take inheritance laws. On paper, they always favor men. Land passes through sons, titles through fathers. But when a man dies suddenly, especially without a male heir, a widow can sometimes step in temporarily at first, managing the estate until a son comes of age. Overseeing harvests, negotiating leases, paying taxes, but sometimes the boy is too young, sometimes he dies, sometimes there is no heir. And the widow, she keeps the books, she learns the rhythms of the land, and eventually she just stays. There are towns where widows run taverns, manage mills, oversee shipping contracts. Not because the law welcomes them, but because no one else knows how the place runs. It's easier to tolerate a competent woman than risk chaos, and so she becomes a quiet force, respected behind her back, even if no one would dare say it to her face. Then there are the women who trade. Market stalls, cloth production, brewing, midwifery, all technically female professions. But some women push further. They broker deals, lend money, take apprentices. They register their names in town charters. They become visible. And with visibility comes danger, but also power. One famous example, Marguerite Kempe, a 15th century English woman who was part mystic, part businesswoman, part walking scandal. She ran her own brewing business before having a religious conversion and eventually dictated what's now considered the first English autobiography. In it, she describes resisting her husband's sexual demands by appealing to a local bishop. Yes, legally, her life is messy, chaotic, controversial, and completely outside the line she was given. But she made it hers. You also see women exploiting legal contradictions. In some towns, unmarried women could own property. So rather than remarry after widowhood, some chose to stay single, calling themselves fee souls, operating as legal individuals. In a world where marriage stripped you of legal identity, remaining alone could protect your autonomy. It meant living on the margins, often without protection, but it also meant you owned your name. In places where guilds flourished, like Florence, London, Bruges, some women joined under loopholes. A husband dies, and his widow inherits his membership. A daughter helps in the shop and slowly takes over. In theory, guilds were for men. In practice, women squeezed in through side doors. Some even trained their daughters, passing down tools and tricks and silent instructions. Don't let them see you measure too confidently, one might whisper. Let them think you're guessing, and don't underestimate the power of the convent, not as a spiritual retreat, but as a site of quiet autonomy. Wealthy families sent daughters there to avoid expensive dowries. But some women chose the convent to escape marriage altogether. Once inside, they could write, teach, manage property, even engage in politics. Some abbesses wielded more real-world power than local lords, commanding lands, labor, and respect. They answered only to the Pope, and sometimes not even him. Here's a wonderfully strange footnote. In parts of medieval Europe, certain women disguised themselves as men within the law. There are records of women petitioning for the right to dress in men's clothing, to travel safely, or to perform male-dominated jobs. Some were granted permits, temporary licenses to transgress, sanctioned by the very authorities that enforced the rules. It's almost comical. The system was so rigid it created its own loopholes, like a maze so tight it folds in on itself. Even prostitution, as grim as it often was, gave some women financial independence. There are cases of former sex workers buying property, supporting children, even opening bathhouse. It's not a fairy tale. It's survival economics, but it's still a crack in the wall. Of course, not every act of autonomy is recorded. Some women live double lives, respectable by day, radical by night. A midwife who delivers babies and slips birth control advice under the table. A merchant's wife who reinvests profits without telling her husband. A maid who listens at keyholes, sells what she hears, and earns enough to buy her own freedom. Historians still wrestle with the question, how much agency did medieval women really have? Some say the records exaggerate exceptions, painting a few bold outliers as evidence of widespread autonomy. Others argue the opposite, that the quiet acts of independence were so common they became invisible, unworthy of comment. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps power isn't always loud. So tonight, as the fire in your imagination dies to a slow, steady ember, picture yourself slipping through a side door, keys jingling softly at your waist. You don't wear a crown, you don't hold a sword, but you know the back alleys of your life better than anyone else. And in a world that tried to lock you out, you've made a home behind every unlocked door. Sleep quietly, clever girl. The system was never airtight. The wind smells like damp wool and hot bread, and your hands are chapped from working the fields. Your dress is patched in 5 places, and your feet ache, but the work is done for now. You lean against a fence post to stare out across the open land and think maybe just for a second about something more than survival. Something like choice, like control, because lately, something strange has been happening. The rules are still there, yes, but they feel looser at the edges. Not because anyone's given you permission, but because the world itself is changing. Welcome to the economic shift that no one planned, but everyone felt as feudalism begins to crack under the weight of plague, war, and rebellion. The grip on women's bodies, especially working-class women, starts to loosen, not all at once, not evenly, but enough to notice enough to make space. It starts, ironically, with devastation. The Black Hemp sweeps through Europe in the mid-4th century and kills, depending on the region, up to half the population. Horrifying. Yes, entire villages vanish. But in the aftermath, labor becomes scarce, and suddenly your work matters. You're not just your husband's wife or your father's daughter. You're a laborer, a necessity, someone who can weave, mend, plant, milk, bake, brew. And for the first time in a long time, that gives you leverage. Landowners need hands, and they're not picky about whose. Women take jobs that would have been off limits before, tending flocks, repairing roads, even taking on apprenticeships meant for men. Some demand higher wages, some actually get them. It's not freedom exactly, but it's friction. And friction creates change. In towns, it's even more obvious. With men dying or away at war, women step into their businesses, not quietly, not as a favor, as workers, as owners. In the textile industry especially, women dominate every stage of production, from spinning to dyeing to selling. Guilds still try to shut them out, of course, but they can't ignore them entirely. You can't enforce purity laws when you're running out of soap. This is the beginning of the female labor force becoming visible. Before you worked in the home, uncounted and undervalued. Now, people see you. They complain about you in letters and legal records. They accuse you of undercutting prices, stealing work from men, corrupting trade. That's how you know you've become a threat. And don't forget the markets. Rural women take their goods, cheese and eggs, herbs to town and haggle like pros. Some make enough to reinvest. Some form informal cooperatives. Some, like in late medieval Flanders, become moneylenders on the side. It's not glamorous, it's not safe, but it's movement. There are records of women owning taverns, mills, breweries, and small shops. Some hire others. Mom might pass their businesses on to daughters. Some live independently their entire lives. Widows or spinsters by choice. Not because they weren't desirable, but because marriage would have cost them their autonomy. It's not a common path, but it's real. And here's a strange, crunchy little detail. The church didn't know what to do with these women. Female labor wasn't sinful exactly, but it was suspect. A woman who worked too much, who earned too much, who spoke too much in public, she was seen as unfeminine. That was the favorite insult. Unwomanly. Never mind that your hands fed 10 people or that your income kept the roof up. You'd stepped out of line, and stepping out of line, that's a threat to the whole order. Even the sumpy laws, the rules about who could wear what, reflected this unease. In some cities, women were banned from wearing silk or gold unless their husbands made a certain income. Why? Because newly wealthy women, especially those who worked, were flaunting their success. Tailor, innkeepers, cloth merchants, they dressed like ladies, and that blurred the lines. Couldn't have that. The nobility, of course, tried to tighten their grip. They doubled down on arranged marriages, on dowry enforcement, on locking women in towers and metaphorical cages. But even there, the seams were stretching. Educated noble women began writing letters, a lot of letters, some in Latin, some in verse. They ran households, negotiated inheritances, even acted as diplomats while their husbands were away at war. One Italian noblewoman, Isabella d'Este, ran a court so efficiently that foreign powers wrote directly to her, not her absent husband. No, this wasn't a revolution, but it was a foot in the door. And behind it all, the economy kept shifting. Trade expanded, towns grew, banks formed, new jobs appeared. Scribes, clerks, textile inspectors, nurses, even bookbinders. Not all were open to women, but some were enough to matter. In Northern Europe, some women joined begin communities, lay sisterhoods that let women live communally outside of marriage, supporting themselves through work and prayer. Not cloistered, not married, just free-ish. Historians argue about how long this window of relative autonomy lasted. Some say it closed by the 16th century, when new waves of religious reform and scientific advancement slammed it shut again. Others say the seeds planted in this era bloomed centuries later, when women's labor movements and suffrage fights took root. Either way, the ripple effect is real, and the fear of that ripple. You can still see it in the backlash. The sudden rise in witch trials, the obsession with enforcing natural roles, the tightening of reproductive control. Whenever women start stepping forward, the powers that be start screaming about morality, about chaos, about what happens when women leave the hearth. It's no coincidence that the loudest cries for purity come right after women begin to taste independence. So tonight, as your mind starts to soften and your breath deepens, picture a woman with her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, leaning over a ledger by candlelight. Her fingers are stained with ink and flour. Her business is small but steady. No one gave it to her. She claimed it, and no one's taking it back without a fight. You don't always need a sword to start a revolution. Sometimes all it takes is a broom, a coin, and a cracked open window. You wake to the sound of bells. Morning mass, maybe. Or maybe someone's just died. It's hard to tell anymore. You pull your shawl tighter and look out the window, and the world looks both familiar and strange. The buildings are still stone, the streets still muddy, but something is different. The men in charge are speaking with tighter voices. The sermons are longer, the rules are stricter. Fear hangs heavier in the air. And you, a woman, are once again the thing they fear the most. Because when systems start to crack, they don't look inward. They look for someone to blame. And that someone, more often than not, is you. This is the late medieval backlash. The system smells change and it doesn't like it. Women have been visible, too visible. Owning property, running businesses, writing, preaching, healing, asking questions, sometimes just existing in public, taking up space that men thought belonged only to them. And so the noose tightens, the walls rise again. But this time they're sharper, hungrier, because this time they come cloaked in something far darker. Accusation. Witchcraft. It's not new exactly. The fear of magical women existed long before, lurking in folklore, whispered behind doors. But by the 15th century, it transforms, becomes weaponized, organized, institutional. Suddenly, the church, the courts, and the self-proclaimed experts all agree. Women, ordinary, everyday women, are making pacts with the devil, flying through the night, spoiling milk, killing children, causing storms just by existing outside the bounds of what they are told to be. The Malus Maleficarum, a book whose name sounds like a spell but is really a manual for hunting witches, was written in 1487 by two Dominican inquisitors. It quickly spreads across Europe, becoming the go-to guide for identifying, interrogating, and executing supposed witches. And if you flip through it, which you'd only do at your own risk, you'll notice one consistent theme. Women are more susceptible to the devil. Why? Because they're weaker, more emotional, more sexual. Because as one charming passage puts it, she is more carnal than a man. In other words, her body, her desire, her voice, all evidence of guilt. The numbers are staggering. Over the next few centuries, tens of thousands of women, especially older, poor, outspoken, or simply unlucky ones, are accused, tortured, are burned, drowned. They don't have to be midwives or herbalists, though that helps. They don't have to be childless or unmarried, though that helps too. All they really need to do is not fit, not be quiet, not be obedient, not be invisible. The witch hunt is the natural extension of everything we've seen. It's not about magic. It's about control, about punishing female power in any form. You learn to survive by being clever, by finding the cracks. They're trying to fill those cracks with fire now, and yet something else is brewing. The printing press has arrived. Books are no longer hand-copied luxuries. Ideas can spread faster. Literacy is rising slowly, unevenly, but rising. Women begin to read. Some learn to write. They share letters, diaries, and wire and stories. Marginalia in prayer books becomes a kind of resistance. Small notes, annotations, little acts of self-expression tucked between the lines of scripture. Even art shifts. Women appear in paintings not just as madas or temptresses, but as people, tired, wrinkled, laughing, reading. They are still idealized, still symbolic, but there's a crack in the lens. Someone is starting to see. And among the rubble, some women keep working. The midwives, despite being labeled as dangerous, continue to care for mothers in secret. The widows keep their shops open, handing down trade knowledge to daughters instead of sons. Some noble women, barred from public life, commission music, libraries, and schools. There are even female patrons funding manuscripts that include women's stories quietly, strategically. It's not a golden age, it's a battleground. But every step taken by a woman before you makes the road under your feet a little more solid. There's a fierce debate among historians about what the late medieval period meant for women. Was it the start of empowerment or a descent into tighter control? Some point to the witch hunts and say, see, the backlash proved how fragile their gains were. Others point to the rise in female literacy, the records of female-led businesses, the growing visibility in legal documents, and ask, wasn't that progress too? The answer, frustratingly, is yes to both. That's the truth of it. Gains followed by punishment, freedom followed by crackdown. Women climbed and the system kicked again and again. But the climbing never stopped. And tonight, you sit with that, with the weight of it, the grind of it. Every woman who came before you made choices with very few choices available. Some knelt, some ran, some fought, some burned, some just endured. And yet somehow, despite all the laws, the sermons, the shame, women kept being human fully loudly against the odds. So, as the last page curls and the light in your room softens to gold, you imagine a future not yet written. One where the body you inhabit isn't a curse or a cage, but a home. One where being born female doesn't come with terms and conditions. One where power isn't permission granted from above, but a slow, steady fire lit from within. Breathe into that warmth. Sleep like a woman who survived empires. So now, lying there in the quiet dark, let your breath settle into rhythm with the night around you. Let the weight of these stories, these women, rest lightly, not like chains, but like blankets pulled snug against your shoulders. You've traveled a long way tonight through convents and kitchens, markets and monasteries, courtrooms, birthing stools, and gallows. You've stood in the shoes of saints, servants, rebels, mystics, midwives, merchants, and ghosts. You've seen what it costs to live in a body the world tries so hard to control. And still, you've seen how they lived anyway. That's the through line, isn't it? They lived, not perfectly, not peacefully, not always by choice, but they made space for themselves in corners and cracks, in whispered prayers and quiet refusals. They made homes inside systems designed to exclude them. They carved out power from the very things used to oppress them. And though they weren't always safe or free or remembered by name, they were real, and they are still with you in the ways you may not even realize. The laws that tried to bind their bodies have shifted. The language has changed. The cages are newer, smoother, but some bars remain. But so do the blueprints for resistance. You've inherited every small rebellion, every stolen moment of joy, every time a woman said no when the world demanded yes. These aren't just history lessons, they're survival guides. So if your shoulders feel a little stronger now, it's because you've carried centuries tonight. Let yourself rest. Let your body be yours. And if you dream, may it be of wide fields, unlocked doors, and a voice, maybe your own, whispering, I was always more than they let me be. Good night, wild.